All right, the recording has started. Anyone nervous about a replay? You know you're going to have one? Hey, Shama, how you doing? Hey, Ernie. So let's see that Haristian's question. Let me think here. Oh, here we go. Wow, all set. Fast typer. Hey, Jennifer, how you doing? Let's see. Perfect. I right now am working out. But when I saw your video that we should drop the goal of liking ourselves, I don't know if it makes sense. And my motivation kind of suffers. Got it. Okay, so this is a helpful question. Do you think I should go to the gym? There are obviously health benefits, and I heard that some people who don't do sports seem less happier, but I'm still not convinced. Can I have your opinion on that? Thanks for your work. You're welcome. So anyways, let's take recording. I'm just laughing at this picture with Metallica here. I should know his name. I do know his name, but I'm blanking out. But it's a funny name if you look at the comments. All right, cover from that and get to focus. All right, thank you for that, Run. All right, so this is great to hear. Haristian C. All right, so the goal to like yourself, there's a lot to it. I'm trying to think where I'm just getting a foothold for myself and where to start. The simple answer, it's not so much about whether you're going to gym. I guess you wouldn't necessarily want to go to the gym in order to like yourself more is one part of the answer. Small part. Well, let me start with something that's easy to see. If you are looking to doing client consulting or thinking about how much income that you want to make, then you want to think about that goal in light of something that you want your goals to not be all blurry, mishmashed, different ones clashing and so forth. When a person's first like kind of starts to look at the goals that they have, then what they're doing is they're just sort of having goals that their mind currently has. And before that, a person is really given that clear thought, then those goals will come from all sorts of places and they can conflict. They can get triggered at different times. They tend not to have good boundaries. And so someone will be supposedly going after one goal, and then other things will come up and get triggered other goals. And one of the goals that gets triggered constantly is a goal to believe that you're already, first I'll put it the simple way, to believe that you're already like good or at least not so bad, right? Some people are on a bit of a spectrum or different places when it comes to where they feel like they want to fit relative to the norms that their mind picks up. So someone might want to be better than other people in general. Some other people might want to just not fall too far behind how other people are in various, and it can also depend on what aspect of life we're talking about. So the same person might want to be superior when it comes to how good they are socially or how good they feel like they are morally. Intuitively, I don't mean that they on purpose have this goal, but it might have gotten lodged in their mind automatically before reflecting on things that they want to feel superior, like better than average. They might want to be more good, kind of as a good person than whatever their mind comes up with as average. When it comes to making money, that same person might feel like you just want it to be about the same. And again, not on purpose. I'm putting words to something that's deeply embedded in their mind that they don't even often realize. They might want to just keep up with, once again, their peer group, their kind of norm group, right? The mind doesn't just get norms. It doesn't go out the whole world to look at norms like of how much money it makes you feel like you should make. It goes and looks at what it calculates to be like your peer group, right? What are people like you? Generally, people like the people that you grew up in your neighborhood with when you were small. That's typically where a person's mind picks up the norms for how much money to make, for example. And then moral norms would be, it's fairly easy to guess. It's a similar process. All right. So then what happens is by default, right? Default is super important because default is like where things are already headed. And we either swim against it or by noticing, we're going to talk about noticing more and more. It relates to seeing, like I talked about last time. By noticing default and being aware of the idea itself, then we can have a sense of where our goals are headed by default, right? And then or lots of other things are headed by default. What another person's personality is like by default and so forth. And then we can also start to get better at changing default, permanently changing a default situation, which means we can stop swimming against, I was about to make my point and say swimming against headwinds, but swimming against the current, flying against headwinds and such. All right. So then what people have is a goal to again, in different parts of their life, this pattern iterates in different parts of your life, but the specific application of it changes from topic to topic in your life. But what we, by default, are going to want to keep up with a bunch of norms for how we should be when it comes to money, how good we are, how smart we are, how fit we are, how attractive our significant other is in many cases, things like that. Right. And we don't stop and think and set goals like that, these goals to like, so a goal for liking yourself is basically a goal to maintain standards and norm to have, and it's typically a goal for the past, which is one clue that there's an issue with it. Right. So one thing you definitely don't want to do is have a goal to already be smart, already be good, already be right about all kinds of stuff. Right. And people will say, oh, I'm not right about everything. I don't know everything. But then they'll have the kind of treasured set of beliefs or things that they've done or things that they know that they do want to believe that they already got. It might be how good a parent they've already been, right? And or how good a boyfriend or girlfriend they've already been, things like that. So just because you or another person has some things where they can admit they're wrong, people tend to have a treasured sore spot. You could also think of it, right? Like a place that's protected where they have a goal. If they know how to look at it right, they'll see that they have a goal to already have done things, to have already been good enough. And having a goal, right, where they'll want to already, you probably follow what I'm saying. No, I'll just give a quick indication. Like once you start looking to see if someone has that, you can see the symptoms of it, right? If someone's going to be touchy about the fact that they actually didn't do a good job as they hoped, being smart, being a good mother, father, boyfriend, girlfriend, friend, player on a team, right? Money getter, provider, whatever sort of thing, right? Or if someone looks in the mirror and they see that currently their body isn't the way they want, that's actually a symptom of a goal for the past, right? But if it's a goal for the past, that is something that looks very similar, but is the exact opposite, or in one sense, the exact opposite, is to notice that reality, the way things are now, is not where you'd ideally want them to be. We live our lives like that until what I think we can get to is where there's no bad, right? And even if we can't get to where there's no bad, that's irrelevant for how we live our lives, because we obviously want to have less bad in our lives, and we obviously can have less bad in our lives, right? Can obviously make progress in that way. It's the motivation for a lot of our actions is to have less bad. On the other hand, when it comes to good stuff or good experiences that flow from matching between the environment and your mind and so forth, like a nice match, like a painting that you like or a song you like or an activity you like or a person you enjoy being with. Those, you don't necessarily max that out. Even if the world was perfect in the sense of no bad, we could still maybe have more good experiences, obviously, and more caring about others. And then they have good stuff. And then we feel happy about that in addition to our own good experiences. We can create new music. We can create new video games, right? We can go have experiences with people we care about and enjoy that and share stuff. So there's more, we can always have more good. And so you can be, even if the world was perfect in one sense, you could be there with some people you care about and think of an activity you wanted to do and imagine doing it and think that'd be even more fun than just staying totally still and go do it, right? That doesn't need to be it's the wrong reframe to say that means you're dissatisfied with staying still. It just, you imagine something that would be nifty or nice or presumably good, and then you go make it, do it, whatever. As long as you're accurate about that, which happens plenty, right? We can be inaccurate plenty, but certainly we go and do stuff that we think we'll enjoy and we enjoy it sometimes, right? And that doesn't need to be reframed as dissatisfaction or being discontent or certainly not being negative, right? And then there's the example I've given from Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, for example, where in a woman, not all women, of course, but this is shockingly similar across women, at least in our culture. It's neither good nor bad, but what isn't good is to misinterpret it. And if you're a guy, like if they say we never go out, that can sound like an expression of dissatisfaction when in fact they really are just thinking that they want to go out. Right? And so the guy can misinterpret it. If he interprets it correctly, then it just means that, again, that it's just a purely nice, that the person wants to go out. And if you guys go out, you might have fun. And if you're correct about that, you obviously find a place that you actually do enjoy going, then it was all a good thing. And the only problem will be misinterpreting it. So if you're looking at your body and you're thinking, oh, it could be more ideal, and that would be helpful, and that would lead to good conscious experience for me, then it's really a matter of whether that your judgment about that is correct. That's not a goal to like yourself, right? You could incorrectly reframe virtually every goal as a goal to like yourself. And Another thing that what I just said that you can reframe the goal is actually another way to look at that is goals can get twisted, and they do. And it's extremely common. It's almost universal that goals constantly get twisted. When you think you're going after one goal, the target itself can get twisted right from the beginning, or the pursuit of it can get twisted very quickly into a goal to like yourself, to believe that you're doing a good job, believe that you're making progress in a way that is unhelpful, right? We're going to talk about how seeing progress some more. I've already talked about it a bit, but it's so central to life and so central to how people screw up their pursuits, their success pursuits, their money pursuits. Success pursuits is basically literally every minute you can be reframed as a success pursuit. You're going after something. If you're not staring at the wall and not moving, then you're going after something and you're trying to be successful. When people do that, there's errors that are nearly like very universal, and they can get twisted into a goal to believe, to feel better about, feel like more good about yourself. That's what I'm saying to watch out for. And I'll keep explaining because it's such a useful topic. What it would look like if you didn't screw it up is, suppose you accurately theorize, come up with the idea, I think, that if you work on on exercising, that will lead to various additionally good experiences, or might avoid some bad experience that you might have. First, if I just stipulate that that's the case without delving into that for a moment, then it's a matter of alternative use of resources. So suppose that, sorry, there's a couple thoughts collided in my head there. One, tried a couple. Now, on the whole, men tend to theorize incorrectly about how how much it'll matter for them to be in better shape. For them to be in better shape when it comes to attracting women. That I'm not saying that it's irrelevant, but men tend to get it wrong. And they even tend to get the body parts wrong that women care about, right? And so forth. I'm not trying to be a total expert on that, but I can at least say that they tend to get that wrong, right? And so you, as a practical matter, you might want to, and this is one of a zillion examples of how when we see something and feel certain because it just clicks and makes sense to us, that we don't think to question it. We don't notice the difference. So you might be so used to assuming that certain body parts being developed are the most important things for attraction, that you might not even think to ask or find a way to ask in a way that you get an accurate answer from enough women that you get a decent sense of things. Of course, you could ask one woman and that woman might have an opinion that's different than the majority of women. I'm never trying to say that everyone in a group, of course, is alike, unless there's characteristics of a group that they all must share in common, right? Because it's a shared belief. It's part of the being group. So you might want to check on that, right? And if you're working out for that reason, if you're working out for health reasons, then it's just a matter of getting your facts straight and your alternative use straight, right? If you are you can actually see if someone just has a goal to like themselves, then it could prevent them from identifying the real sensible reasons why they might work out. And then they might not get it straight. They might just, let's say all it takes to like yourself in practice, not upon reflection, but just by default. All it takes to like yourself, all it might take to like yourself might be that you go to the gym and that you see certain results that you yourself find more attractive in yourself, right? What's maladaptive or not very strategic about that is you might not realize to look for some of the things I just covered, right? Hey, actually the things that women find attractive might be different than what I might guess, right? Or the amount of development of the muscles might be different for either the majority of women or the women that you might be interested in, or however you slice and dice it, right? Of course, you can look like virtually anything. You could develop all kinds of muscles in different ways, and some women might find that. But if you reflect on it, if you're just going to be putting all that effort into working out just to be, I'm not saying you are, I'm just getting different thoughts, right? Different to illustrate strategy, right? And how to look at things properly. So if someone were to say, I want to just be more attractive to women, then by their own statement, they're trying to increase like the general odds, right? Particularly the pool of women that they want to attract, right? At least in that pool of women, there's a certain age group and so forth, then they're looking to be more attractive, but they might have their facts wrong. And again, if your goal accidentally just ends up, you're just trying to like yourself, then you might not look for the actual facts on what it is that women are going to find attractive when it comes to you working out. On the other hand, if you're working out for self-defense purposes, then once again, the muscles and tone and the type of workout you do might probably be different than, again, if it's just the goal to like yourself. So that probably starts to answer pretty well, right? It starts to give you enough fodder to start to think about it differently. You could see how by default, if the goal ends up, even if you don't realize it, to like yourself, you don't approach the situation very smartly. And then plus what can happen, this does happen with plenty of guys, is they'll work out. Another thing they'll do, and especially in LA and so forth, is they'll take steroids and things like that, right? Which might be counterproductive for their attitude and their mindset, right? It can affect your behavior, right? Thinking and your impulses in a way that's very counterproductive for at least maintaining a relationship. And then these people, if they thought about it, if we trace their motivation, they want to be loved generally, or like they want to be loved in a romantic relationship, what that means, where they partially earn it, but then partially it's unconditional at some point, et cetera, and so forth. And taking steroids is a great way to block yourself from that. Totally. However, you can see between the goal to like themselves and then getting progress wrong, seeing progress. If they see progress as their muscles get bigger faster, and they equate that with women will like me more without really thinking about it. They think that's what it is, but then really they're just trying to like themselves. And then they're doing things that are counterproductive, right? They're creating, even if something creates a bit of a benefit for you, like my berry thing where you learn to differentiate the berries. Even if something has a benefit, but also a drawback, getting aggressive with people you work with would be like that, right? Like you might get what you want in the short term, but you create a current against yourself more in the long term, like a vector that's also counterproductive. But it's surprisingly common because people see the result quickly, right? And so again, they see progress in their own way where it's not totally accurate, but it'll seem like they're seeing progress, and then people will do it. What I found in life is that nearly, in one sense, all the time, you won't always see it in time, but if you look for it, then you'll get it, and then you'll get better at getting it, is that if there's something that's going to give you a benefit, but also have a drawback, if you understand what you're doing more closely, then you can often get the benefit without the drawback. Like you can get what you can tease it apart, like we talked about in alchemy, and do things in a way where you're not creating the kind of backlash or the opposite reaction or the vector against you but it takes a little bit of investigating, thinking, and teasing apart the situation. Let me see if I tied off the various threads there. So men can, like in LA, I know that some friends of mine saw this a lot, right? And the guys would take steroids, work out, look a certain way in the short term, or maybe never. It might help them in some ways with some women. But then the guy themselves, they get like one of the things I think I referred to last time, but it's one of the things I want to reinforce in different ways. When you develop yourself within one box, you're better off within that box, but you sometimes it's something to look out for. You'll become specialized in a way where you're less adapted to life outside the box. Right. And that happens actually in evolution, and then it happens all over the place, right? It happens, specializing with something. And it's possible to not do that. And thinking like a meta strategist is the kind of the simple answer to how not to do that is you get specialized for a box. You look at the meta strategies you're applying to do that. You're looking at how you're getting better at the box so that you're actually better off the next time you need to adapt if the box changes or if the box isn't appropriate for a situation. So let's suppose a guy gets really quite buff and it really is an advantage with women. The problem is he might be reinforcing his own sense of how, you see, when you're initially in dating, it's about being a high value person. And people, again, this is invisible because it's by default, it's there all the time for people when they're in a certain high school kind of mindset or environment. I use that kind of as a shorthand. And it's kind of competitive. It's not a different environment than after you find someone and they're committed to you, something like married or close to it or whatever. Then your whole way you look at the world in terms of other guys and stuff, and either changes unless the association hasn't gotten let go. And then people might stay there and that creates problems. But anyhow, in this high school mindset, it's about a real key to when you're dating and making the transition to being able to be in a happy long-term relationship is to make the transition from it all being about being a high value. If you look at like pickup training, so much of it is about implying that you're a high value person. The problem is that very rapidly, once you get in a relationship, if you don't transition to collaborating and creating a high value relationship and changing the value to having a valuable relationship rather than you being a valuable person, you see, you being a valuable person basically even backfired, because if you're a high status person, then what that means is other people are supposed to make in what's it called? Full trades with you, literally. If you separately from right now, if you stop and reflect on it, think about it a little bit, then literally that's what status does. Is it people have to like trade unfavorably with you, or you get more out of a trade, which in a vacuum, in its own box, can have benefits. The trouble is it creates an overall backlash again that's worse. So that's why I don't deal in that way. I don't at all, right? I've done my best from the beginning with OMG to prevent that to whatever degree I can. I've had greater and lesser success at that, depending. But I certainly don't buy into that at all, right? Where I don't try to make unfavorable trades. People, what you can do, by the way, is to, when it's all the same, if you can appear higher status and then make even trades with people, then it's a bit of a win-win as far as I can tell. It works out well. It keeps them from screwing up and thinking themselves as higher status than you, which kind of prevents you from interacting with them if you don't buy into that. I try to bypass that these days that way when it's applicable. Otherwise, mostly I try to not get into that game. But regarding this example, which I personally find pretty fascinating, a lot of you might for various reasons, right? Because it also is transitive. That the same type of thing occurs all over in life. So in dating, a person will, and this will seep into all kinds of long-term relationships too, and poison it to some degree. Even if the relationship limps along, it'll screw up in various ways. When you're by association, by default, by habit, and invisibly, people stick with this high value. There's a meta thing about what I'm talking about that applies to getting clients as well. Being aware of this kind of status thing, the high value situation and so forth. What you want to do is do the high value person thing just to make the initial contact. And then as quickly as possible, you want to transition in terms of a high value relationship, including with client consulting, is the high status can get you started and keep them from pulling it on you in a way that kind of screws the deal up as well. But then you want to switch to, and you say how to do that. You switch yourself and then in your communication to a vision of the intersection of what you're doing together with a client consulting relationship. And obviously that is helping getting them traffic or getting them ranked or whatever that might be, and doing the value of that, including even if another person sees themselves in status is very context dependent. And so a person could be high status, but like a guy could be super high status, but he breaks his leg. And in that case, he's with his doctor who can set it, then he's going to defer to the doctor, right? In that setting, the doctor's status, or even if it's a kind of a low status emergency responder, then if that's the person that needs to fix their leg, then they'll defer to them. It doesn't really matter overall how high status a person is. If you're the person that can rank them and they don't know how to rank and they don't know how to do it, then in that context, the status thing can wash out and focus on the shared vision. Back to with the working on your body and women thing, what guys do, the more they kind of work on their own status, the more they get specialized in that box, and the more and you can do it as long as you're aware of it and can let go of it properly. But when they don't realize it, then they end up getting more sucked into this high status thing where they themselves are valuable and deserve this, that, and the other thing. And then that makes a person worse in a relationship. The more high status you think you are, the more of a disparity you feel between yourself and the person when it comes to status, then that's going to interfere with the relationship. On top of that, if you feel like you're super high status and the other person can only maintain a relationship with you by maintaining high status in your eyes, then that's a problem too, because that's exhausting. Or it might be not exhausting, it might be easy for both of you, as long as it's easy. But then if it becomes difficult for someone to maintain their body or their career or whatever the heck is giving them status. So what you want to do is find a way out of the whole status thing altogether in relationships. You don't want to, and how do you do that? When you can see outside of it, it's easy to go. And what I mean is that it's not like, you don't want to have the attitude, well, I'm an amazing person and you're an amazing person, and that's why we like dating each other. Or then people do it by categories, right? It might be fashion, it might be how their bodies are, how athletic they are, how smart they are, all these things. People are in this wrestling match with themselves and others and so forth to be superior a lot, right? If you learn to look at it that way, you'll see it. And you don't want to then feel superior because you see it, by the way. You just want to get outside the whole game and help others outside of it, not by lecturing them. But when you see, how do you get anyone to anywhere is you need to see where you are and where they are. Right? And the minute you see a moral difference overall, then that interferes. Right? The minute you're judging someone else in general, that interferes. You can, again, judge that someone isn't someplace else, that someone isn't as good, particular skill. So anyway, that's a big bottleneck that people have when it comes to dating, is making the transition to creating a high value relationship rather than it being all about high value people. Well, yeah, in an alliance. Like a lot of relationships end up being, people don't know any better. It's like an alliance between two people of similar status. I remember when I was younger, I read a book, you might have heard of it, you might not have, I don't know how famous it is, called One Fat Summer. And there were a guy and a girl, and they were good friends, and they weren't quite dating, but they were those kind of best friends, like high schoolish or junior high. And they were equal status because they were both, in their minds, I'm not making any statement or judgment about people's weight and overall how good it is or bad it is. But they were both overweight, and that kind of, they shared that, and they saw that as a certain status thing that put them lower, but they felt equal with it and they felt good and it was good. Then I think the girl went and lost a bunch of weight, and then it created a bunch of problems, right? So once people are in that, on that playing field, in that mistake of making it about status in the first, or as I said, when they don't realize that they're accidentally making an alliance between two similar status people. And that's, again, that's what a lot of people's relationships get started on and don't get off. And then not only do they fall apart if the status changes, but they're exhausting. Or you're like crabs in a barrel, sabotaging each other, right? Trying to stay low status so you stay together, right? Sabotaging yourself, other people. So again, this might be quite eye-opening, right? And again, it's transitive to the extent that you can think about it, because this isn't, this type of realizing this can open your eyes to other stuff in life. And this is a massive key, massive bottleneck to relationships is when people frame them without realizing it, right? Invisibly by default as an alliance between two similar status people. And again, this same exact, anything that happens in romantic, nearly anything, maybe literally everything, maybe nearly everything that happens in romantic relationships is parallel and been parallel once you adjust a little bit or look at it from scratch, make sure you don't import the wrong part of the analogy, but it can shed so much light. It can be clues for anomalies and realize things about working relationships as well. So a lot of stuff there, but sometimes going into a bunch of detail helps to give the big picture, kind of help explain. So how was that? Oh, nifty. Thank you, Julie. Posting a book that's related and she likes. Shema writes, in personal development, it's big to learn to love yourself. As often there is a current of being very critical and unloving to the self. This helped me a lot over the years to get in a better relationship with myself. I assuming this is different than don't have the goal to like yourself. All right. Let me explore one angle on this and see what we got. Suppose people are, but basically this is a local peak. Nearly all self-development advice is instructions on how to climb a particular local peak. And sometimes it is transitive, what they say, and sometimes it's not. And sometimes they're based on a big error and they're correct once you account for the error, but then they're ultimately incorrect because of the error. Let's take a look for a second at the parallel here between your relationship with yourself. Not worrying, we'll delve into what I mean by you. And what I talked about as a relationship being like an alliance between two people of similar status. Once you're trapped in that, then it's crucial to maintain a similar perception of status with each other, with yourself, with each other, right? Literally, relationships totally depend. If they're stuck there, they're stuck. They have to maintain a similar status, right? In their own perception of themselves and each other. If the status gets out of whack between two people, where the relationship, without them realizing it, is an alliance between people of similar status, then I'll probably saying the same thing there. Sorry. Wasn't quite sure how I started that sentence. Sorry. I'm not going to finish that particular sentence, but I'm staying on the same thread here. So if you need to love yourself in order to continue, let's look at one other potential parallel. Suppose I need to feel confident in my ability to rank a website in order to go and work on ranking the next website. Or I need to feel confident in myself in order to go do a webinar or to go meet with a client, right? Or to do any number of things, right? If you need that, it's circular, right? If you are addicted to crack cocaine, then if you don't take it for a couple of days, as I understand it, I'm not really encountered this personally, but you're going to go into fit, right? And then if you take crack cocaine, you'll feel better, and you actually will look better, right? Like the withdrawal symptoms are horrendous, or like heroin is horrendous, right? And then, but someone takes it, they look better. And then if everyone was addicted to heroin and we took that for granted, then we could have self-improvement people. And there's plenty of stuff that's correct and useful, or at least transitive, once you know how to look for it with self-improvement. So I'm not blanket criticizing all, but so much of it is also like the berries where it's mixed, right? Good stuff. And then some incorrect assumptions and that ultimately make it counterproductive. But I was saying, that, the heroin. If everyone's addicted to heroin, right, then it would sound like correct advice that you need to take heroin. It'd be like taking a vitamin, right? You take heroin and you feel better and you think more clearly and everything seems wonderful. And that's not such a bad metaphor for this idea of loving yourself. Telling people the more you know to look for this, the more you understand what I'm saying. And it's weirdly hard to see because it's so universal and it's so reinforced in so many ways. It's used as like a platform everywhere. This idea of liking yourself it's just almost like a subset of this idea of needing to see progress. And then, which is related to the whole local peak algorithm and so forth. And fundamentally, that's what I'm teaching you. Crushing the Game is showing you how to see that whole aspect of life, how that all works, and then not be trapped inside of it when you don't want to be. So both me and someone that wants to work out for the wrong reasons might both go work out, right? But the ideal me who's not trapped inside of this would be thinking about it in a different way that would be more adaptive top to bottom, right, in terms of working out. So it might look the same. We might both be working out. Similarly, you can climb a peak regardless of whether you see the local peak idea or not and how you can get trapped and so forth. Or if you do see it, you could still be climbing, but you're climbing productively and adaptively in one way and in a way that ultimately is going to get you stuck otherwise. So I'm so glad you said this and asked this, Shema, because no, you want to get outside of this whole thing about loving yourself. If I say 2 + 3 = 5, or a bum on the street says 2 + 3 = 5, that's correct because of something other than that person's status, how much they love themselves, how great a person they are, etc. You can have confidence based on a plan that logically is set up properly and can't fail. Let me give you a specific example. And what you can see there, I'm going to give you an example of a plan that I did recently in my own life that you'll see what I mean by it can't fail. And then because of it, the person carrying out the plan or myself doesn't need to have confidence in the sense of loving myself, already thinking that I'm great. Or you might say, no, David, loving yourself isn't thinking you're great. It's like accepting yourself, being comfortable with who you are. That you should be able to do instantly by clearing up a contradiction. Again, anything that has to do with not accepting the way things already are must mean that you have a goal for the past to be different, but you can't affect the past. And we can parse out exactly how time works and so forth, but I already understand that very well. And the simple interpretation is perfectly adequate. Right? So just like you don't have to know everything about how a car works to drive it, you don't have to know everything about how time works in order to understand enough or accept that a goal for the past is ridiculous. Right? And you can just try experiment. Set some goals for changing the past and see how well that turns out. And I'd be willing to bet you that you're going to keep on not accomplishing your goals for the past. Unless, of course, your goal ends up matching how things already work in the past, in which case nothing that you did affected that it already was that way regardless. So to think that one needs to accept oneself, that's true as long as what you mean is you need to stop setting goals for the past and you need to accept everything about how the world currently is. We need to really get a good grasp on what the difference is between, again, this idea of goals. It's funny because it's not necessarily complicated. It took me forever to figure out up to where I figured out currently, and I'm still working on that, but I have a lot figured out because there's so many mistakes that are so deep in the default, how people think about things. Even like I referred to last time, and I'll still get to that example I mentioned, but even what I referred to last time about how things are like onions and that they're composed of like layers of stuff, both not just perception, but perception and environmental things, however you want to think of it. But basically anything that you think of as a thing is just it's a bunch of layers. And there's no thing in the middle inside the layers. The thing is composed or created by our mind into our conscious field out of the layers. And there's nothing but the layers. What I just said is, as far as I know, like very unique. You might find some stuff here and there in some Asian philosophy somewhere that seems to be saying something similar. But then you continue with the stuff that I'm talking about and the clarity, and I don't know that it's found somewhere else. As I would say, if it is great, go sip martinis by the pool. I'm happy, man. I'm not doing this to like myself. Anyhow, so there's all these invisible things. And then I'll just tie off that thread and I'll get to the example. So I'm talking about accepting yourself. You, just like with everything that currently exists, you want to accept yourself, just like everything else that you want to accept. You want to accept mass murders and nuclear bombs having been gone off in the past, right? That doesn't mean that we want that to happen in the future, for goodness sake. We don't affirm that it hit the ideal, right? Obviously, the way things currently are, it's not ideal. That's why there's still stuff to change, right? The default is not ideal. We need to change the default, not just surface stuff. But the idea of loving yourself that you will encounter contains incorrect ideas mixed in with that. And you might say, well, what are the incorrect ideas? In essence, what I've already said over and over, where you end up trying to convince yourself that you've done a good enough job living up to some standard. Say you just fudge the standard and fudge your memory and you're fine. You love yourself. Magic. Right? Great. Instead of having to do all that, you could just accept that however things have been, they've been. And then because there's bad still, we want to understand more. And then even if there's no bad, then we just like to understand more about what makes more good stuff, more good experiences, more. And so I wouldn't say that I love myself. I like myself. It's an irrelevant question. Again, if someone asks that, I'm not confusing what they could mean without contradicting themselves. I can identify contradictions and what they might mean, but not, you try to peel away the mistakes and you're left with kind of nothing. Do I feel guilty about the past? No. Do I want to hurt myself because the past doesn't hold me back? Ideally, no. Hold on. Do I want the default of how myself has been in the past to continue without any changes? Not if I experience any bad, and then regardless, I want to understand better what the ideal might be. Separately from reaching for an ideal, that's skipping over a step of figuring out how to identify how to understand the ideal, right? So at least I want to be finished being satisfied about clarity about what the ideal would be and understand that and then head there. Okay, here's an example of a plan where it can fail. And because of that, the whole confidence trap, the whole thing about I have to believe that I'm great in order to take a foot forward is bypassed because you can just make plans that don't need that. This has to do with, I was talking to my wife and then thinking about dealing with an issue or with parenting and with our son, Chance, who is just turned 5 recently. And so what'll happen is there's activities that you want to commit to, right? For example, if you want to do a sports little thing, right? There's a sports thing that meets once a week where they cover like soccer and some other things, and it's a group of 6 kids, right? Or music lessons that are fun and geared toward kids that he likes. Or we have a person come in and speak Spanish with him that works out well and so forth. And so there's activities obviously that you do with a child, and a lot of them are kind of weekly. But what would happen is that they'll decide to do something and she might ask him, but he's not consistent with, except for solely being 5. I myself don't commit to things I don't really end up wanting to do, but it's predictable that it'll lead to an exhausting tug of war before some of these activities. Like sometimes you'll want to go, sometimes you won't, and it can be exhausting. And so my wife is talking about that with me and wanting to think about what to do. And so there's a number of meta strategies that are, there, right? When the more you have a toolbox of these, one major one is what do I say strategy is often fundamentally about, or maybe always is a major component of strategy, or maybe maybe it boils down to this, who knows, but alternative use of limited resource, right? So when you're parenting, you're going to need to do some amount of pushing a child and some amount of spending some emotional energy doing so. And how do I know that is, how about if you never push a child? Then the problem with that is like abandoning a child fully to their own impulses. What if they just want to eat nothing but lollipops, right? Again, you can see something by going to the extreme and checking it that way. It's always it should be very common. Like I do it constantly. I need to do it constantly. If you don't, then you're not really checking ideas right properly. So what if we didn't? So I checked in my head very quickly. What if we just didn't push him at all with anything? That doesn't really make sense. At some point, if he just wanted to stare at the wall all day, we would want to encourage him to go try this, try that. And it might take a little bit of controlling. Now, on the other hand, do we want to structure everything? Do we want to go to extremes and beating him and so forth? Obviously not, right? To get him to go places or even any kind of beating in that case. But I'm just saying. So I look at both extremes first. So I look in one direction, no pushing doesn't make sense. I look in the other direction, total pushing doesn't make sense either. And so that means there's something in between. It's not always that way in life, but in this case it is. And what you're going to find commonly in there is there's a gray area. There's clarity on the extremes. Another example of this is if a 20-year-old is attracted to another 20-year-old, is that appropriate in terms of age? Obviously, is it? But what about a 1-year-old and a 20-year-old? No, clearly no. How about a 20-year-old and I guess you could say that it's fine actually once the person's 20, no matter how old the person is, right? It gets a little bit more surprising as it gets particularly different in age or they get particularly old, but particularly ridiculous if you go down with the age for one of them. So in one, it's totally clear that it's fine with a 20-year-olds, totally clear that it's not fine with a 1-year-old and a 20-year-old. And then as you start to get closer to let's keep one at 20, and then as you get the other one closer to 20, then you hit a gray area right around 15, 16, 17, 18, right? Depending on how you parse things, what your opinion is. Some people might say, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? There's no gray area at 15. But throughout history, we might agree that it's on the side of the gray area where maybe we don't go there, maybe we do, who knows? But anyhow, there's a place where there's no gray. And so that type of thing will come up. When that comes up, what we want to do is chill out a little bit in the gray area and not try to win the battle by going to extremes within the gray area. When you have a legal thing, for example, where there's a cutoff, like the girl has a birthday. If it's right before her birthday, the guy goes to jail for 20 years. If it's right after her birthday, he goes to jail 0. That's not how you want to treat the gray area. You want to start to, at least, even if there's going to be a penalty, you want to really make it more of a gray thing, kind of treat it as gray and have much less of a crazy threshold one day or the next. So regarding this thing with chance, inside the gray area, you just eyeball it reasonably, okay? Rather than try to pretend or convince yourself. We know you don't push totally. We know you don't want to not push at all, as far as I can tell, right? And then I said, go down to two commitments a week. Right? Currently, they were closer to 5. And so go to 2 and do that for 4 months. And then what you're going to do is you're going to learn something, right? For those 2 things, push them. We don't really have an issue with going to extremes with the pushing itself. So that's not our issue. We're not wondering whether to, I don't know, like how hard to beat him or something. We just don't beat him at all in our case. And I'm not making a judgment about that. I'm just saying in our case, it's not really the issue. So there's not really, it stops at a place where it's kind of gray and reasonable anyway, but push them as she normally does with those 2 things and then not with the other things and actually just don't have the commitments. If the nature of the commitment is that you probably, if you have to, we're paying for it or we're showing up, should show up, then just drop it. If it's something that's optional, then just have it be optional. Going to church on Sunday is not the kind of thing we have to commit to in advance, or so then he can, if she wants to go on a particular day, and don't ask him the day before, just that moment, like when it's time to go. And then see how that goes with her own emotional reserves. Oh, and because the other thing that was going on was then she would be more irritable with him than she wanted to be sometimes, other times, right? She'd get herself exhausted and patience and then act that way a little bit more than she herself wanted to. None of this was me coming in and saying, I want you to change who you are as a mom. She was coming to me with her own concerns. I was talking her through it. And then try 2 for 4 months and then see what that looks like. After 4 months, you can pare it down to 1, 0, or try 1, maybe try 0, but probably depending on how it goes, or go up to 3, go up to 4. And he can also get a sense for himself of if there's activities that he finds he can see the difference of what he gets for committing and what he doesn't. It's neither a punishment nor whatever natural kind of consequence, just seeing, all right, I get a benefit for committing, but then it has a drawback. And at 5, he's not necessarily going to act on seeing the difference perfectly, or even at 6 or 7 or 8. But one thing I told her to drop was this idea of having him, trying to get him to agree to something one day that you would have to fulfill upon in future days. Because it's just too difficult when you're 5. And for him in particular, it's obvious that he doesn't do a good job predicting the day in advance, the week in advance, a couple months in advance. If he's committing to a flat course, or camp or something that's going to go for a while. So that's the default, right? The default is it's clear that he's not going to predict. And so let's go with that. We're not going to fight against that current. Let's work with it. Let's not, and it's almost like taking advantage of it or just counterproductive. Like he can learn about or practice committing at a time when it's more possible for him. Right now, it's basically impossible for him to keep his word in that way. It's just too difficult. And so we'll just try it a little later and we'll make a plan that takes into account. So can this fail? No, because there's no failing. She pushes like she normally does for two times out of the week. If she pushes to the extent that she's normally is comfortable doing and he still doesn't go, then they don't go. And then in 4 months, based on that, we'll see if we want to drop more things or add some things. And so however it goes, it's not, remember how I talked about think I talked about this in my kind of pre-series to this about, was it something else to gain? Forgetting what the word was. But how what people do is their plan will be for plan A to succeed. Right. So they'll be like, okay, the plan is you accomplish such and such. That's not a plan. That's like a target. And when we want to hit a target, then what I do is I set us up to understand about hitting the target rather than hitting the target. I don't plan to hit a target. I plan to understand my way to understand better and better until the target ends up being. And this plan is an example of it. And it's already working nicely. She's more relaxed. He's happy. He did his activity that he often resists today happily. There wasn't an issue. But the plan isn't like, the plan would work no matter what, right? But it's already bearing fruit, just like it inevitably was going to relax things. Because remember, what we're really trying to do also is make it so she's using, remember, it's one of the resources that's limited here, or maybe valid resource that's limited, is like her emotional reserves for how much she wants to struggle with Chance, and then how much is going to be irritable with him when she doesn't want to be based on struggling too much, right? Then we need to get a sense. And so we're seeing now, if she's not exceeding her reserves, then that's the main thing we're trying to look at, right? Or trying to solve. And that kind of got solved pretty much immediately. So I gave that whole example. You can extract meta strategies or see meta strategies I've already talked about more clearly based on it. But also, when you make a plan like that, we don't need confidence. I don't need to say to her, look, I've already raised 10 kids and they're all awesome. Therefore, you should believe me when I say this. You see, I haven't done that, right? But I didn't need to have that enough. My confidence came from clarity of thought and from a strategy that can't fail, that inevitably is going to succeed. And I'm used to making strategies like that. I have confidence I can do that, but just based on reality. But I didn't need that confidence in order to do it. I just needed the ability to do it. So you see, if you're going to meet a client and you understand the kind of meta of how to look at it, where you're understanding your way to the sale, you do your preparation well ahead of time. And then you go there and you learn more about your preparation itself, right? You learn how to prepare better. You don't go there to find out that you've prepared well enough. That's a goal to like yourself, right? You see, or to see how your progress is, to see if your progress is good enough. That's all just back to the goal to like yourself, but back to the goal to see progress in a way that's kind of productive, that most everyone's trapped in. And most all planning and strategy, what people call strategy and success advice, is within that wrong frame of needing to see progress in the wrong way and like themselves in the wrong way. Instead, you can make plans that can't fail, where, again, you're going to meet a client. You're not doing it to see if your preparation was good enough. You don't do it to see if you're good enough, if your overall money-getting ability is good enough. You do it to learn in a sense of understand. We could use the word learn, but learning in practice has different meaning. And some of the meetings are not the meetings we want. Like, learning could just be like associating. Like, you can hear someone say something, believe it, and call that learning. And it is in one usage of the term, but your understanding might not have got up. That information might be false or irrelevant, right? Or overly specialized, not transitive to your situation. Or a guy could learn that he's unattractive by going out and trying to date, right? But that might not that's not gaining understanding. And they didn't really learn it in the sense that they're actually, what you could learn is that currently something has to get changed with the way you're doing stuff. You need, right? Like, the default isn't going to automatically get you to your target without any trying. You're going out and trying to date and it's not working. Or you're going out and trying to make money and it's not working. Or you're going out and trying to get potential or actual clients, right? If it's not working, then what you've learned is, at least by default, you're not just going to hit the target by reaching out and just seeing that. Something's not fully ideal yet in your default that you can discover or understand however you want to put it. Okay, great. Let me refresh it. Obviously, it's stuck. See if Christian sent anything back as well. Christian said, I'll get to that in a minute. Christian said, David, I can't thank you enough. I'm also really a lot thinking about this one question for about weeks. And even though it's 3 a.m. right now here in Germany, I really want to know what you think about it. Isn't everything arbitrary? All right. I appreciate you staying up till 3 a.m. for that. The few answers to that. One important answer is no. And don't worry, I'm right about one answer on there. That's a dictionary in a nutshell, right? Yeah, from before. So one answer is no. Another answer is, it depends what you mean by thing. I'm not going to cop out with those two things. I'm just going to give a sense. There's a certain way that what your mind thinks of as real by default is basically going to all be arbitrary. not real in a foundational sense of like it's necessary. It is the way it has to be. You're looking at it as if it's the case. For example, if someone breaks up with you and you say that's like an event, and you look at what people do is the event is like a thing that they're looking at, and they'll say that's bad. Okay. So as soon as someone does that and says that and thinks that and feels that, then they're giving a sense of foundational independent reality to the event. And this is how people tend to look at everything. I'm giving one example of what people do universally with objects and events and people and everything, is they assign a reality and an independence and kind of thingness to it. Like I talked about, like, again, with the onion, related to my onion thing, they act as if there's an onion inside the onion, that when you peel away the layers, you see the real onion. And you're looking, like, the layers you look at, right? You look at real things with lenses, and you can look at it, again, I'm saying the incorrect but default way that people think, that's so universal that it might be almost confusing what I'm saying. But what people think as if they're looking at events, people, the world, objects as plans, theories, future imagination, like the imaginations of what the future will look like, which we do constantly, right? As if they're looking at it, they understand, they think of that we, like what Stephen Covey says, the idea that we look at the world through lenses, but that assumes there's a real thing that we're looking at with lenses. And what there actually is like a set of factors, a set of layers. We don't really even have good terms until we construct our own terms proper, like through constructing the concept properly and then putting a term to it. I don't define words to other words, but if we construct the right idea and then we can give it a term. I haven't done that really yet with you, but I'm just talking independently of that right now. It is not correct that that there's like an independent event that kind of has its own fundamental reality that then we look at through a series of perspectives and lenses. Really, what's actually the case is that there's layers of factors. We can see this there's another thing that I need to at least give you an indication of here. Things exist in and of themselves in a certain way in your consciousness field. When you look at a tree or a computer, your experience, like when you see, like when you do what you think of as seeing an object, right? So you look at your computer right now, or your iPhone, or whatever you're looking at. You experience an object. That experience that you have, that visual image as you think of it, whatever words you want to put to it, but you have a conscious experience and there's an object there. And there really is something there, because we can understand the difference between not seeing a computer and seeing a computer. So there's something there. I'm not saying there absolutely is. Like that thing that you see is not made up of molecule, right? Like it's in a certain sense that'll make sense out of over time. It's not made up of parts. You see a computer as a whole. We're going to want to understand the relationship between parts and the whole, not just out of philosophical interest, but because, again, these things are bottlenecks or problems with how we understand the world fundamentally that causes symptomatic issues, right? I'm able to talk practically about practical issues, but the reason I was able to come up with plans like I did with my son, which is very practical, right? And I didn't even choose that. I didn't even cherry pick. My wife came to me with the issue and I gave her a plan that's pretty damn good for dealing with it. But how I do that is ultimately to understand these deeper things that I'm talking about now, what I'm touching on now, right? So the practical and this deeper stuff, it all relate in a very real and necessary way. But there's a way that we want to more and more understand that there's a way that we can make it correct that a thing is made out of parts, and there's a way that it's not. We want to tease that apart. And the thing in your consciousness field is not made up of layers. The reason why you see along with the conclusions that you make about it, the assumptions you take for granted, that's made up of layers. And when you strip away all the layers, there's nothing left. So the layers don't exist in your consciousness field. An object and your experiences exist. Your overall, by the time the layers being processed by your mind, just to use shorthand, it's the perfect way to represent it, but there is no perfect way to represent it until we build the right way to represent it. But by the time the layers of reason get processed by your mind, then you have a perception of the event, like the girl broke up with you. Okay. That experience is real as a real thing in your conscious field. The feelings associated with it are real, but they're not real in the sense that they're not real as reasons. It's real as an experience, but there's a way that people can't change their experience. There's an inflexibility that's very practically important in your day-to-day life and in your accomplishing the goals that are important to you. There's a the reason why what this I'm saying matters so much is because and I touched on this word last time too, there's an inflexibility that people have towards how they understand the reason or the layers that make up events, objects, or future or plan, right? This affects your strategy, planning, which is not exact synonyms, but they all go hand in hand. Your actions are based on what you notice about when you think about the future, right? You make decisions or what your mind separately notices and makes decisions without you realizing it about the future. And so what you are imagining about the future, and then you're imagining if you perform certain actions, say certain things, prepare in certain ways that may or may not get you or gives you a percentage chance to get to a goal in the future. All of that is like a thing that you're seeing that's a composite of a whole bunch of layers. And there's a greater flexibility that you can have about how you can even saying, if I complete the sentence by saying how you can see things, a better thing to use the word notice is that you can notice differently. So for example, suppose two people are standing on my porch, right? And if we're looking out, one person could notice, wow, that's a beautiful sky and the air is nice and it's like a beautiful temperature. Another person could notice that their girlfriend just broke up with them, right? Now, there might be reasons to notice that their girlfriend broke up with them. Maybe they need to act upon that. Maybe they need to cancel their insurance policy and make a new one that only their. So I'm not saying that one person's wrong and one person's right. But one of the places I want to go in this webinar, and I don't really narrow it down in my planning, it has to be on this particular webinar. But I want you to, one of the major ideas I want to start to continue towards and I've been talking about things that are related to it the whole way through, but this idea of noticing, right? And when we talk about seeing, perception, and so forth, the idea of noticing is going to become more critical and more central. And when you start to think about meta strategy, about the nature of how we notice what we notice, and also then the nature of what that leads to, how much depends on what we notice, we can start to notice that in one matter of thinking about things, kind of everything, like all our actions depend on what we notice versus what we don't. And then we can even parse it out. We're actually going to get tangled up unless we have another distinction that I have as another meta distinction, which is getting better at the distinction between you and your mind, or even aspects of your mind. And there can be things that are noticed by your mind that it acts on that it might not even bring to your attention consciously, right? That's how one way or another there's a difference somewhere, right, between you and your mind. Or I know people normally have a similar distinction, or sorry, some perhaps similar distinction of your subconscious and conscious. But as we think about noticing, and we can also realize that there's not just one entity or one thing doing the noticing. There's one or more things that you can notice consciously, you can notice subconsciously. Then there's another thing where maybe neither you're subconsciously nor are you consciously aware of noticing something. Maybe it's worked into the assumptions that now where your mind doesn't notice it on any level, but it acts upon that assumption by habit or by default and so forth. So you act as if you notice things only one way rather than another way. And then that functionally matters very much, of course, as well. So what do we notice? What does our mind notice? What's the nature of that? What are the ramifications of that? And how does it work in terms of acting as if we notice something because it's just by default, or you're not noticing an alternative, right? Like people generally don't see an alternative to the idea of liking themselves or the idea of seeing progress in a way that is actually counterproductive or brain limiting. So isn't everything arbitrary? It's arbitrary to assign the symbol or the sound or the word TWO, with the concept of two. That's arbitrary. But it's not arbitrary once you assign symbols to two. The meaning associated with the symbol two is no longer arbitrary. You're thinking inaccurately if you start to switch the meaning associated with a symbol. And then once you assign words to the concept 2 plus 3 equals and 5, then it's not arbitrary to say that 2 plus 3 equals. And you might say, if it's built on something arbitrary? No, it's not. You don't build the concept 2 plus 3 equals 5 on the symbol. right? The symbols just run parallel. It's not the idea that God's existence is not arbitrary. Your existence is not arbitrary. The fact that your consciousness field is what it is right now, that you're aware of what you're aware of and not something else. Certain justifications in your mind might be arbitrary. And there could be arbitrariness involved somewhere with what you're aware of, but that you're aware of what you're aware of is not arbitrary. You're aware of what you're aware of, not something else. It's foundational in a certain way. That's very important. Once you stipulate, and I'm giving another example. This isn't the same as what I said before. This is additional and related, but additional. Once you stipulate facts or scenario and so forth, then conclusion, once you stipulate a premise, or a premise can be real in some way, but in addition, if you stipulate a premise, the conclusions aren't arbitrary. If I say I have $5,000 to spend, what do I want to buy with it? Then it's stipulated. It's not arbitrary. That I chose the number arbitrarily, but now within that scenario, it's not. And the conclusions are not arbitrary. The conclusions are either correct or incorrect. So that starts to give it, that's not a full answer. A full answer is me continuing as I'm continuing, but that helped. Let me just see was it to this that Fletch responded? Maybe it's a totally different thread. I just saw it pop up before. Don't mean to skip past people, but just while I'm here. Julie said, my 13-year-old son demonstrated the layers and context idea to me beautifully yesterday. He was telling me a story and I was reacting somewhat negatively to him dropping what to me felt like big bombs of information along the way. So he was telling a story and you're like, whoa, back up. What was that? Okay. To him, this was perfectly reasonable. And he explained that he didn't know at the beginning that the bomb would be significant and then it was revealed as he was telling the story. So there you go. You can use that as an example to demonstrate. Let's see if I can use this further. And be careful, right? When looking at layers, you want to start to think about the idea of it's not layers of perspective that you're looking at a thing with. It's really easy to slip back there. It's so ingrained in how everyone thinks. And I'll either on this webinar or in the future or both, I'll continue to develop this idea. So I illustrate further what I mean by that we want to get away from saying we're looking at an event. Oh, actually, let me think. So in terms of the idea that someone broke up with you and that's bad, right? A guy and a girl broke up with him, it's bad. And that event is bad. To conclude that it's bad, again, you're giving fundamental reality to it as if it's an independent thing that you're looking at, and it necessarily, however you look at it, has to be bad, right? If there was even one way if there's any sort of ingredients, any sort of factors, any perspective that where it's not bad, that it isn't bad intrinsically, right? If someone says such and such is bad, literally, if there's even one if there's one way to look at it, so to speak, and I realize I'm using terminology that has problems, but we have to start somewhere and I can continue. Again, just saying look at it is an issue. But as anything you can mix, if there's any vector, if there's any frame, if there's any way that you can look at it and it's not bad, then it isn't bad, right? Bad is getting mixed in with a situation somewhere along the way, or there's some contradiction, there's some ingredient. And I've quarantined or put aside property rights violations. I'm still kind of working on that. But outside of that, again, regardless of that, if there's a way to look at anything, so to speak, or if there's a way to reframe how you're seeing it, what you're noticing now, so that it isn't bad. And again, the past can't really be bad. What's bad, you're having an experience, you're feeling bad in your consciousness. And then the question is that necessary? And then another thing that people end up concluding is bad is that is a setback on the way to what I want. So then you can identify things more clearly and say, instead of saying it's bad, let me think, all right, so what's going on here? Let's say an ideal is that I want to have a love relationship that I can feel some sense of love that is secure and whatever else. And then this is a setback, but wait a second. Am I going to want to frame every setback as bad? And then first of all, no. And then to not do that, what's a setback? Right. And I've talked about this before. When we start to look at what a setback is, it ends up dissolving, being a little ridiculous. If I expected one thing and had another thing happen, and then that's bad. So is the problem the expectation? It's not quite that simple. If you're having no expectation, it's like having no default. But what you can do is use an expectation purely in order to gain understanding. You can have a sense of what you might expect the result to be, or okay, I wasn't expecting her to break up with me. So and use that as a clue that, okay, there's something I didn't get previously. But when framing and not having your expectations met is bad, that comes from this idea of seeing progress is good and seeing a negative progress or a lack of progress is bad. And then that is based on this idea of presuming that seeing is accurate. Our fundamental bottleneck, but it isn't obvious to people, but if they could tug on a thread properly. Last webinar, I use an example where I talked about you need to function and think in a way where anomalies can break your current thinking. Because if something's not going right and there's something that you're not seeing or you got to notice, an anomaly can make you notice something. Normally what the default way that people think is anomalies tend to get swamped out. They tend to be marginalized or deleted. You want to learn to use anomalies as a lever or a wedge to notice something you're not noticing. And that way you can embrace anomalies. But it's all part of one model that's alternative model to the default model, and you want to be able to see both. I realize it's a bit of an open thread, but let me just see what people are saying here. Like what I was saying was an open thread, but it's part of what I'm already talking about consistently. It's part of what I'm always talking about in Crushing the Game. So everything I'm saying is related to this idea of we want to see both models. We want to see the default model of where people feel like they want to see progress. The problem there is the epistemology assumption. It's that, oh, when I see something and I'm sure and I feel certain, it's right. People function as if that's the case. Why would people want to see progress unless they assumed that what they saw was accurate? If we embrace the idea that, and I know what to do next here, if we embrace with none of it, but when we embrace the idea properly, again, if we let it break, if we let it make us notice something, that seeing does not, feeling totally certain about what we see does not equal accuracy. If what people do is they marginalize and delete that. No matter how many times people think that things are going to be one way and it turns out to be a different way, they don't let it break their assumption. They still think they want to see progress. But what worth is it of seeing progress if seeing doesn't work? And if seeing doesn't work sometimes, it doesn't work. If seeing doesn't work sometimes, the key or the bottleneck is that you need to figure out how that works. How do you parse that apart so that you can understand progress in a way that's accurate? So again, one way of understanding or representing the fundamental bottleneck that people face in success is that seeing progress is inaccurate. Their way of seeing is off. And then everything else about success flows from there. Go look at all success advice based on fundamentally, they talk to you about how to see progress. They talk about how to make progress, seeing progress, and so forth, right? But if you look for the hidden assumption of that you'll know progress when you see it, then you'll see it then. But that's false. People do not know progress when they see it. That's the basic problem. That's why no matter how complicated these webinars might seem or how many times you have to re-listen to them, it doesn't matter because this is what we need to get. What good is it? You can't do anything about progress in your life if your method of seeing progress doesn't work. But that's how it is for everyone. Literally. Once you know how to look for it, it's constant. Sometimes it'll work and sometimes it won't. But it won't work a lot. A lot of times people will think they're making progress when they're not. Or they are making progress and think they're not. Or there's a way to make progress. They could see it if they knew how, and they don't. One of those things. You're seeing you think you're seeing. So sometimes you think you're seeing progress and you are making. Sometimes. There's three other problems. You think you see progress, but you're not making progress. You're getting stuck. You're running in circles, or you're heading off cliff, or whatever. Right? You're getting the woman to sleep with you, but you're reinforcing all kinds of other problems and issues. You're not getting any closer to a love relationship, but you think you are. Right? I'm not criticizing going out and trying to get women to sleep with you. I'm saying that if we stipulate that the goal is to have a long-term love relationship, then seeing that as progress is not ideal. That's what I'm saying. Okay. So sometimes you will see progress sorry, we'll think we see progress, and we'll feel sure we're making progress, right? The guy doesn't say, oh, I see progress. Maybe I'm making progress. They feel certain. When I say see, there's a certainty that they're making progress. They will report to their friends triumphantly about what happened. Right? For example, implicit in that is they're making progress, right? It's of course. So a lot of times people are progressing in terms of convincing themselves that they like something that makes them like themselves more. And they count that as progress towards some other goal when it's not. So we think we see progress constantly and we're not making progress. Again, sometimes we think we see progress and okay, I grant that. But plenty of times we think we are and we don't. Other times we actually are making progress, but we don't see it. That's a problem because then we'll drive into San Francisco. We won't keep doing that thing that was actually helpful because we didn't see the progress fast enough, right? Where someone might be progressing through OMG well, but not think that they see progress. And then maybe they'll give up, or maybe they're trying a particular path that would work for them, but they give up too soon. So if someone gives up too soon, the problem isn't perseverance. That's a symptom is perseverance. All these accessory posters have to do with not giving up on this guy quit right before the finish line. They tell a story. That's a symptom, not the bottleneck. It's not the key. It's looking in the wrong place yet again. Perseverance, the reason I'm always disparaging perseverance is because it doesn't do anything for you because, again, it's a symptom. Right? You don't try to stay well by not sneezing. That's a symptom to sneezing. Right? You try to stay well by not either getting infected or having it overwhelm your immune system and so, right? And you don't get better by stifling a sneeze. So persevering is only, if you're trying to persevere and it's difficult, you're spending some sort of emotional resources at the limited supply to make up for seeing things incorrectly in the first place. How do we know we're seeing things incorrectly? If it's difficult to persevere, but you should, that means by logic, by what I already stipulated, you're heading in the right direction, right? So if you could notice properly, then you wouldn't need any emotional effort to persevere because you're heading in the right direction. If you noticed it right or you saw it in a way that was an accurate representation, you'd easily keep going because you feel it's in progress. Since we're saying that persevering is a virtue, right, then it must be that we're talking about something where your seeing is off. Like, that's right, Justin, exactly. Just takes me poking around. That's how it works. You poke, and then you finally find it open. But this is always the same. It's always the same way to succeed. Anyhow, you want to get me off my rev. We can keep the rev going. I was saying sometimes you see progress and you're correct. Sometimes you see progress but you're wrong. Other times, and this is the whole persevering issue, is you are making progress but you don't see it, and then people try to fix that by pouring emotion into it. If it's in the moment and you think you might be making progress but you don't think you see it, you don't feel it, but you're going to progress anyway. You're going to persevere anyway. Fine. Okay. But that's swimming upstream. Sometimes you need to swim upstream in the moment, but you don't want to keep doing it as a matter of strategy, right? That's not where you want to stay. So what you want to do is get better at noticing progress properly. Because I am pretty good at this compared to where I used to be, at least, and probably reasonably speaking, I'm better at it than people generally at seeing actual progress because I have the understanding line idea again, and I have a sense of what constitutes actual progress. I have a whole mental model for it. And just like knowing that you're better at 10x than most everyone, it's possible for me to know that I'm better at this than most everyone. I don't care. If people show me I was wrong, then I'm wrong, regardless. So you want to get better at the model. So I've identified two problems so far with seeing progress. One is, and I'm repeating myself, but I just want to keep it fresh in your mind. Seeing, but it's quick to repeat. Seeing, but that's inaccurate. You're actually not making progress, but not seeing it. And the other is if you saw how to make progress, you would do something, but you don't see, so you're stuck, right? So you're stuck in the sense of paralyzed. There's different ways to be stuck. Or you could be moving around, not even knowing you're stuck. But in this case, you're paralyzed. And you might miss that as symptomatically and say, oh, I lack motivation. Again, really what we lack is if we focus on getting better at noticing the right things, noticing opportunities that are really opportunities, not noticing an opportunity incorrectly that's not an opportunity. So we don't want to, right? So what we see, represent, notice, all these words kind of point to what I mean. They're not synonyms and they're not a little bit angles on what we're talking about. We want to get better at noticing. Once you get better at noticing, then again, as symptoms of what seem like self-sabotage or seem like lack of motivation or seem like not persevering or seem like maybe I'm lazy or maybe I'm this or that, when you can notice how to progress and you're in a correct way, then all the rest of it dissolves. You don't have to worry about those things. So that's what we want to do. Now the question is, how did I get on that? Oh, I know. I told you about illustrating. And this was something I had prepared that I want to talk about. Maybe I'm making progress that night. Absolutely. If you're an OMG, you're almost certainly, I have it set up so that you're basically, if your eyes are pointed, your nose is pointed towards OMG in any way, then you're pretty much going to be making progress. There might be a more ideal way for you to make faster progress, but you're basically making progress if your nose is pointed at OMG. I don't mean that you or myself are perfect, or that it couldn't even be more ideal, that you couldn't be more ideal, or I couldn't be more ideal, or OMG couldn't be more ideal, but it's set up pretty well for that. I'm also thinking about dating. You're listening to me. I give all kinds of bombs about dating and what I talk about here. You'll get awesome. Just stick with this and can't help just because I use it as an example. And I in no way mean that I'm God's gift to women. It's quite different than that extremely. And it's not in case that it all sounds like that's what I'm saying. It's not best advice in the world. I'm not kidding in the slightest. Yeah, I appreciate that. Like he's referring to my advice about dating and relationships. By default, we don't see progress properly. What is progress there? Okay, so it's kind of simple starting way, understanding line. But let's go and let's take another look at the local peak illustration because it's so central. And in light of the fact that we can see really success, goodness, like everything we want, everything kind of boils down to the same type of question like I talked about in a webinar a few times ago. But I said, look, it comes down to one question. Oh, I think in the Crushing the Game you can get the replay through the link. I didn't post it. And where I talked about certainty, fabricated certainty, and how that was a critical bottleneck or one angle on the bottleneck. Anyway, they're saying here, local peaks. Right? Oh, I was saying there's one question, right? The one basic question about how do I make progress? How do I get results? How do I become successful? How do I be happy? How do I make money? It all boils down to the same meta strategy. It's the same question, same answer, right? And it relates to if I can understand how to notice or represent or see progress accurately, then that's one angle. That's one angle on the answer, on like what the answer is going to look like, right? Because if you could just do that, then think about it. You get everywhere you want to go, right? Everything that you could conceive of wanting, other people being better off, the world being fixed, or any mundane, simple goal that you have will all be achieved easily, or any of your perceived bottlenecks like perseverance, motivation, intelligence, confident, right? If you could notice, like, why don't you need to love yourself or be confident in yourself to get to Starbucks that's down the street? Because you can notice progress without a problem, right? We almost don't notice all the things where we can just accurately and clearly notice progress correctly. Whenever that's the case, all these supposed success things aren't relevant. They're only relevant in a world where we can't notice progress accurately. Then you need all the other advice, right? So great, follow it while you're swimming upstream and to help you swim upstream in the moment. But ultimately, get better and better at understanding the nature of noticing progress. And in one sense, it starts with the local peak illustration, because it fundamentally represents the issue when it comes to making progress that is really our situation. It's geared toward not just a theoretical any situation in any universe, but in our actual situation as the type of person and the entity that we are and how the world really works. Yes, growing in understanding is the way David Mills puts it in his older work. Absolutely. And all I'm ever doing is looking at that in a more clear way. So you notice more what I mean by it and don't twist it back, because it's very easy to twist gaining understanding to an incorrect meaning. However, in and of itself, it's super helpful just to know to look for understanding. Is totally helpful to people, but also it's not fully helpful until I elaborate a lot. But thank you. Perfect, Johnny. Thank you. But yeah, I'm fundamentally not reinventing the wheel. I'm just seeing it more clearly myself, getting more into it. But I discovered that it was all about understanding decades ago. And it's been still within that realm. It's been about that. And the more I understand that, the better. But realizing that in the way that I did opened everything up. That's when I was able to say to Mike, pick anything and we'll crush it. It's not about being the best in the world. I don't think I could be the best in the world. I do think that with a ton of things, you and I can be in like the top 10 or top 1% pretty easily. Right? It's just in practical terms. Of course, that's not fundamentally true overall if everyone understood everything. But if everyone understood all this stuff, then it wouldn't have to be in the top 1%. Everything would be so nice that it could be the bottom 1% and be incredibly low. But you either way. But practically speaking, with what I'm showing you, plenty of other people can show you how to be in the top 1% at specific things if you're in the same, metaphorically in the same city they are. In other words, I had a quick little illustration for you, and this relates to local peak, which I'll get to specific. But suppose, just take a look quickly at a note here, just to make sure I remember, but I'm just not. Oh, here, let me ask you this. Suppose I were to tell you that Starbucks is a bad example because there's too many of them. The Walmart, let's just say, is somewhere in Detroit or somewhere in the north of Detroit. I don't know where it is. I'm just saying. That's if I would say somewhere in the north of Detroit. That might sound not very helpful. But if I were to give you exact instructions, but if I live in Houston and I don't realize you live in Detroit, then it's notice that it's actually more beneficial by far for me to tell you it's somewhere in Detroit, if you live in Detroit, or somewhere in the north of Detroit, if I'm right about that, if you live in Detroit, than it is for me to give you exact instructions to the one in Houston. And what does that mean? If you happen to be in the same city, metaphorically speaking, with exact instructions someone's giving you for conversion or whatever the heck, then you're better off. You'll much prefer someone that gives you the exact instructions versus someone that just says it's somewhere in the city, right? But telling you if there's something that there's only one of it in the whole United States would have been a cool example. If I picked like the museum, anyway, depending on, I could adjust the metaphor in a different way. There wouldn't, if there was only one of it in the country, then it'd be a confusion for big cities. I would mess up my metaphor a different way if I go there. But to illustrate a different point, if we're talking about like the Baseball Hall of Fame, if it's in like Louisville, let's say, I might be wrong about the city, then saying it's somewhere in Louisville it's helpful. If that's all you know, it narrows it down considerably. And so I might say, last time I asked someone for instructions, they gave me exact instructions, but maybe we don't know exact instructions. When it comes to making money, it's a pipe dream that there's exact instructions that you can give to a bunch of people and they can all follow those exact instructions and it'll work for all of them, right? So you have to find a sweet spot of giving a whole bunch of useful, specific training and instructions that's specific and within a box enough that it's specific so it's not too general, right? I don't want OMG to be only what I'm talking about, in other words. However, if you're in Houston or in Detroit and people are giving you the instructions to the Walmart in Houston, and you don't realize that you're in a different city, then that's going to be a problem too, right? That I say that not really talking about OMG, but to give more about also like local peak theory and the nature of like boxes and being specialized in a particular box, right? Giving precise driving directions to, or even GPS coordinates. Or if you tell someone what the address is to GPS it, then that's good as long as they have a GPS. But if they don't have a GPS, then that is no longer helpful, right? If you give them exact instructions and mail it to their email, but don't have access to their email, then that's not helpful, right? So by the wrong kind of analogy or metaphor, people can think that they only want exact instructions for various things. But the problem, of course, I'm illustrating what I talk about often, but it's giving you kind of another illustration. There's times that can be more helpful to say it's somewhere in Detroit rather than giving exact instructions that get someone that waste their time and get them lost because those are Houston instructions, not Detroit instructions. And you didn't realize. Okay, let's look specifically. I might come back to that. Like there might be things I can refer to about what I just said that'll be more helpful in the future. But let's put that exact illustration aside. I know I didn't take it very far, but it can apply. You might end up applying it to your life in various ways that kind of shed light on it. But let's look at local peak when it comes to understanding about the nature of progress and seeing it. So the setup for local peak is that you want to get higher in altitude, but you can't see very far. You're either blind and you have some way of telling if you're going higher, but you can't just look out and see where to go. Or you can it's just a huge mountain range and you can't see much of the range. Let's just to pick one. Let's suppose there's a huge mountain range and it's relatively foggy. And so you can see a bit, but you can't see that much visually, but you can see a bit. And you can also just tell if you're going higher, you can tell other ways, right? If you're going higher, both it's opposite. Just physically walking, you can tell if you're going higher generally. All right. So then the question is, if you want to get higher, what do you do? And mainly you walk and in the case where you can just look and see what looks like higher, then you just look and obviously just head up. What'll happen in that case, of course, is that you'll reach the top of your particular peak and you won't even know whether there's other peaks. Now, once we have that basic backdrop that I just described, then we can add elements to it and say, what would happen if this? What would happen if that? What if we do? So suppose instead that you're on an overall huge peak that you can't see, but on that huge peak, there's various kind of sub peaks. And now let's suppose we could just have you want to go up, but then that stops applying to life like perfectly. We can say that higher is better, but then also a little bit working on this here, that there's other conditions that you want to have be better too. Let's say we added some other conditions like you want it to not have a particular piece of vermin around, right? Like a critter that you don't want. And so you go and look at one peak, you climb up, but then there's that critter that you're like, I don't want that critter. So then you go and you look for a place there's no critter. Now, first of all, one thing that you can see is effective is once you are looking for the absence of something, like you don't want something to be there, then you actually have an easy heuristic that is going to be effective. If you explore a peak and you find the thing you don't want, you'll leave the peak, right? Kind of simple. So actually that is how you tell if you're on the wrong peak, is you see something you don't want. Two potential problems could be if there's something that fundamentally you don't want, but you don't realize it, right? That's not nice. And how might that happen? What if you determine goodness by standards, by just looking around and seeing, am I better off than other people? Or is there things that I notice that I don't like? What if there's things that you don't like, but you don't notice? You might say, what's that? Maybe there's mosquitoes on all the peaks and you just take it for granted. You don't really like the mosquitoes, but you don't realize that there's such a thing as not having mosquitoes. Now, there's a way that you can look at it by saying, wait, if I don't want any bad, then you could notice mosquitoes. But if you're just trying to notice what's worse and what's better from what you can notice the difference of, then you might not notice the mosquitoes in that way. In real life, just to step out of that for a second, but keep it in mind, when I changed my backdrop that allowed me to see, just if you have a filter that allows you to look, or like a black light, right? If you have a black light and you can see certain types of writing, or an infrared light or something like that, you can see certain types of things. So when I made my backdrop, when I realized in a correct way of interpreting, there's perhaps incorrect ways to interpret this or ways to dumb it down or twist what I'm saying. But when I realized that fundamentally, it shouldn't be the case that there should be bad. It's a contradiction in terms to say that there ever should be bad, I realized. Of course, you can't apply that to the past. We're talking about ideals for the future. And you don't twist that by saying, I feel bad about feeling bad or something like that. But I realized that, and then when I was able to relate that to realizing that the bad involved contradiction, contradictions would reliably spew out bad into our consciousness field, if you understand what I'm saying by that. If you don't worry for now. Contradictions in our mind, to put it another way, contradictions in our mind, or contradictions in our mind will lead to some bad feeling experiences, and contradictions in other people's minds might even. What I'm guessing, I don't have this fully figured out, but I'm guessing that contradictions in other people's minds hurt us until and unless we're able to spot like a part of our frame that we don't need to have, in which case I don't think that we necessarily need to be hurt by other people's contradictions, but I don't fully get that either yet. There's certain extremes that people can go to with me where I don't think I would react well. I don't think I would like it. I don't think I would be like Zen in response to is what I'm saying. If someone like cut off my arm, I don't see that as not hurting. That would hurt me in some sense. Maybe I could adjust to it and deal with it pretty well, but maybe I would. But I suspect there's a kind of a way even out of that, but I'm not there yet fully. Anyway, I realized that there should be bad, that there should not, that it was, sorry, so here's specifically what I realized. It is never the case that we should have bad. So if there's bad, then there's something to discover. That kind of made the mosquitoes visible, so to speak. Now back to the illustration. The way people tend to act is they think that bad is a part of life in a way that they don't notice things that are bad as anomalies that could lead to a clue. So again, I treat bad as an anomaly that if I pull on the thread well enough and with the right ruthlessness and so forth, if I keep pulling on a thread, I'll find a contradiction at the end of it. And then once I notice the contradiction clearly, then it can dissolve if it's in my own understanding. It's in my own mind. So that allowed me to start to see more things or notice more things than I would otherwise. Normally people, again, don't see something until there's a difference. Normally a person would have to go to a place where there's no mosquitoes in order to realize they prefer not to have mosquitoes, so to speak. And you could argue with me about the specific mosquito thing, depending if you mess with the metaphor. You could say if there's some days when they don't get bitten by mosquitoes and there's days when they do, then there is a difference in that one. But as long as there's a difference, my point is you're not going to get out of it's clearly the case that there's all kinds of things that are bad that people take for granted have to exist. They don't see a difference and they don't see it as an anomaly where they can pull on it. And sometimes it might be outside of myself, but I also believe that I can help other people clear up contradictions ultimately, right, over time. Because anyone who notices a contradiction clearly won't buy into it. They buy into it because they don't notice it clearly. There's no such thing as clearly seeing both sides of a contradictions and affirming them. People can hold contradictory beliefs in their mind for sure. You can try to show someone a contradiction and then deny it and fight you and get upset. I grant that. But if you get what I mean, if they see it clearly, then they will dissolve it, no matter how stubborn you might think that they are or whatever. The stubbornness is in them refusing to help and seeing it clearly. So we're taking a look at local peaks, and the reason we're doing it is the idea of understanding progress with the realization that if you could just notice progress properly, and I'm not saying you can always know the right path for everything the first time, but there's certain meta strategies that you can accumulate that are correct and that will serve as like black lights or whatever, where you can, so to speak, where you can see, you'll understand more about things where you'll see progress. And those things are correct, like those things are accurate and will help you see progress better. There can still be a gray area, but you'll be able to slice off black areas, so to speak, places where progress is not. That will narrow down the part that's gray. And then within that, you might just have to guess or eyeball or poke around. But that's fundamentally the law of implication too. You focus on what you can know. What you can know in practice tends to be what you can see it can't be right. And you slice that off, so to speak. And then you narrow down where your mind as a mechanism, as an algorithm, is built for trying to deal with gray areas. Is another kind of important lesson or potential lesson or statement that lessons will elaborate. But what I'm about to say, which is I've said something, this is ultimately it's similar things I say, but it might be a new angle or similar. But sorry, I'm just getting my train of thought back. What was I saying? You see, somehow pluck myself out of my train of thought. See angles. Someone prompted me here. Cooperstown, New York. It's not Louisville. I admit it that I probably didn't now. At least I've gotten better at realize you kind of have to embrace that we have much more confidence in our fact, even just facts like that than we should. So at least I know anyone got your mind. Yes, perfect. Thank you, Julie. That's what I needed. All right. So our mind is wired for working in gray areas. It's one way of thinking. It's one angle on things as an algorithm by default, without even consciousness. And so, even in one way of looking at it, to your mind, like everything's a gray area, and it starts from that. That's why the question about is everything arbitrary? Everything is not arbitrary, but there's a way there's a way of distinguishing between you and your mind, where your mind, things are arbitrary to your mind because your mind's not conscious. Think of a computer as, of course, not conscious, and so its premises, its algorithms, everything in one way of thinking about it is arbitrary. It got programmed in there. The computer itself didn't control what got programmed into it, and it didn't pick, and it doesn't check the basic premises that you program into a computer, right? Garbage in, garbage out, and all that. So in the sense of knowing whether it's true, a computer doesn't know whether its own programming is true. It doesn't know anything in that way. It can't check in that way. It turns out you need consciousness for it. Your mind, in one way of thinking about it, is one big algorithm for operating in gray area. It's a couple things. It also algorithm they're related, but it gives you a conscious field that you can use to deal with the other part of things. This is imperfect based also our imperfect ability to communicate right now, or the imperfect framework, I should say, that we have together. But you could think of it this way, is that you assist, or the effect of you assisting consciously is to chop off these black areas, so to speak, like the parts that you can be sure aren't right. What people don't realize that, and so they double down, they identify with their mind, which is trying to operate in gray areas, which is like a circular confidence thing. It wants to feel confident. You don't need to do it that way. Your mind doesn't need to feel confident that gray is white or black. Instead, it can actually represent it, see it. It's your mind, so it's not quite the same, but it can be aware that it's gray and be aware that you're maximizing within a gray area. I'll use a specific app example that's helpful. So if you're going to meet a client, same thing with going to do a webinar. What I say during a webinar or what you say to a client or a potential client is a gray area. Even if you're good at ranking, what you do to rank them is a bit of a gray area. You don't know exactly for sure where to get the links and when. And that's perfectly optimal and exactly where it's going to end up on exact which day. So you can actually embrace the gray instead of denying the gray. Is actually pretty cool the way this is shaping up for you to explain. I embrace the gray and look right into it. So this is a cool lesson though. And this is how I approach things. It's just a different way of explaining it. This is my same strategy or outlook all along. This isn't anyway, it's a new way of explaining it. So what you want to do is embrace the gray, but not double down on it. You don't double down. What people do is they double down on their mind by default tries to deal with the gray by turning gray into black and white. That's where the confidence comes in. It's gray, but you need confidence that it's white or black in order to proceed. That's circular. If that's the only way you can proceed is black or white, then you need to believe that gray is black or gray is white. And people are totally caught up in their lives in this when you look for it. The way out is actually to embrace gray as gray. And the way to do that is some things you can tell are black and white, black or white, and you can identify those things. And when you identify those things, you actually narrow down the gray. And that's how to deal with gray areas, is you narrow them down. You narrow down what can be narrowed down. There's actually, it turns out, when you narrow down some, more that you can narrow down will get revealed. When you build on black and white, you'll get more black and white, but not the false black and white of stubborn thinking, right, of what you're trying to convince yourself the gray is black or white. It's actually a particularly cool way of explaining it, in addition to the rest of it. I don't mean like it's the only way, but it's pretty cool, additionally to everything else I've said. That this kind of in and of itself, in one angle, but it contains the whole of what I'm trying to explain to you fundamentally about life and strategy and success and all that. Right? I say it's all one question. Instead of doubling down on pretending or convincing yourself that that gray is black and white, you do something different. By doing something different, you can embrace the gray and the black and the white. And within the gray, you operate as if it's gray, but that's okay. See, when you can only put one foot in front of the other, if it's black or white, if you need to see black or if you need to see white in order to put one foot in front of the other, if you need to be sure that you're going to succeed or you need to see progress, right, in order to keep going. But if you need to see it in the traditional way, if seeing progress means that you look at gray and white, you look at, you trying to get a love relationship, right? You're dating. And you look at the gray of what you're uncertain about in that whole arena. And if you need to see white, like you're making progress, right? What's a gray area? A gray area is how great you are, or whether a particular girl is right for you within the first 5 minutes, or even the first month or two or whatever, right? Or how do you know that? You say, how do you ever know that, right? When you understand targets, threshold, and what I'm saying, then you chop off conceptual thing. In this case, what you are sure you don't want and what you're sure you want, the black and the white, and then anyone within that target, once you do that enough where you get it, and I succeeded at doing this, so in real life, and others have too, some people just get lucky and they stumble into it just like with making money. With me, with money and with relationships, I wasn't good by default and I wasn't getting there by default and I had to figure it out. Okay, that's why it's particularly tribal. That's why the same result by me than by some people that get lucky. It might look the same, but it's not, because I wasn't going to get there without figuring this out first. Or at least figuring out like certain important meta strategies, parts of it, or keys for that. So what you do is you either date around or date a particular person to figure out what's black and what's white that you want in a relationship, maybe in a person, but you might be thinking it's a person. Then one day you realize, wait a second, it's not what I want in a person. It's what I want in a relationship. And I look at it that way. There might be certain aspects of a person that are necessary, but it's because I need it for the relationship. And then you realize to look at it that way. And that's a white thing, right? You're like, okay, now I see that. It's about the relationship, not as a thing outside of me, not as a brand, right? But as something the other person experiences and creates together, right? You don't want to look at a relationship as its own thing to be protected at the detriment of you or your partner either, right? Just like I could protect the OMG brand so well that I kick half the people out of the Facebook. That's not what I want to do. And not even intended, that's horrendous to me, but you might get what I mean. So you're not protecting it as like a brand, the relationship, or you're not protecting it as an appearance to the other people. You're not protecting it as something that meets a certain standard that's supposed to impress others. That would be a misunderstanding of a relationship. But if you understand a relationship properly, and the kind of collaboration and shared experience with this other person and whatever else it consists of, then the parts you understand about it is like what I'm saying is like white or black that you don't want. And then there's still plenty of gray area, but in the gray area, it's fine. Everything in the gray area by logic is okay. If it was clearly not okay, it'd be black. If you absolutely need it, it's white. If it's gray, it's all right. You find someone where they have the white and they don't have the black, then you're good. You're over the threshold. You hit the target. It doesn't have to be a bullseye. It is in essence, if you get the same points regardless, right? It's literally the same as a bullseye. And then it's that way with everything, right? My plan for my wife and Chance, my wife and Chance, if you go back, I narrow down black and white and then we eyeball in the gray area, but we embrace the gray as gray. None of it was pretending that gray was black or white. But then by not pretending gray is black or white, then you need to find the black and the white. You can't, if there was no black and no white, that's how you go to extremes to take a look at something, then literally you couldn't affirm anything. There'd be no reason to take any action. You see what I mean? You need to have some knowledge, like some sense of something in order everything's meaningless, literally, if there's no black or no white whatsoever. If it's all gray, then literally by logic, it's meaningless. So you can't have no black and no white. Since that's the case, if people don't have a process for accurately getting black and white, your mind fabricates it with fabricated certainty, and it's BS. And people's lives are all built on that. And then their whole heuristic is based on here's how to make yourself feel like it's white when it's gray. And here's how to make yourself feel like it's black when it's gray. Here's how to love yourself. You have to love yourself. You have to feel like you're white. You're gray, except the parts that if you notice an idea that's absolutely wrong in yourself, then when you see that it's wrong clearly, you'll immediately drop it. If you're not dropping something, it's because you don't see there's a lack of clarity, even if you think that there is. I'm not going to litigate that right now. I could do that some other time. And then if something is clearly right, where there's no question, there wouldn't be temptation to even do otherwise. You see it in an integrated way, clear that it's correct, then you'll adopt it as part of yourself right away. I'm not talking about a right goal. I'm talking about, like ideas like yourself, your personality, right? Your beliefs, what you act on. And literally belief is what you act on. Those are synonymous terms. So you don't need to love yourself and there's another angle on it in the sense of, oh, my gray is white. No, it's gray. I don't know. And then there's things I've figured out that are correct ideas and that I've adopted those, and that makes myself better. Not better than other people, but obviously if I adopt an idea that's correct, I didn't have before, that's relevant to life, then that's better than if I didn't have that idea. And similarly, if I notice a contradiction in my mind that was going to cause problems for myself or other people and I get rid of it, then that's better than before. And then the gray is gray. No big deal. It totally works. What I'm saying, if it theoretically doesn't seem to work, it's just a miscommunication, or you just have to think it through some more. Right. You embrace gray as gray. And it's awesome when you do that. You wouldn't believe it. And then when you refuse to see gray as black or white, then again, it forces you stop marginalizing, and then you can find people's initial objection when I talk about how to know what's true is that's not enough, right? So in other words, their objection is, I wanted more gray to be cleared up right away. Again, the way you clear it up, gray is going to be gray regardless of what fabricated CERN, right? And we love the phrase now, blowing smoke up your own ass. It just isn't actual progress, right? So gray is gray regardless. If you want to know more, then start with a little bit you do know. Even if it's 2 + 3 = 5, if that's all you know, then that's all you know. And you start there. And you know, how do I know that? Whatever. But we talked about lots of other things you can see if this question. That's awesome. Yep, Julie. So Faith says, how do you know? I keep spinning past where I want to be here. How do you know when you're accurately determining black and white and when you're seeing it to progress? Great. This is a paraphrase of the fundamental, of another angle on the fundamental question. What do I say? The fundamental bottleneck is essentially epistemology, right? So you have asked, but in a new way, you, Faith, have asked the basic question. Generally, people don't act, or if they don't realize what they're asking and let it go, they don't see it properly. What you want to do is see the contradiction in not prioritizing epistemology. The question now, this is it. How do you know when you're determining black and white and when you're seeing it to determine progress, right? This is a statement of the most basic question. And unless you see this question as primary, then keep trying to notice it until you notice this is primary. And if you're acting as if it's not primary, then you're not noticing it. Right? You act on what you notice, or you notice it in one way, but it's not integrated in your mind. Your mind hasn't noticed it. There's a science in a sense. I don't know if that's the right word, but there's a method that's quite relevant. Of course, it's automatically good for the next question. Not you, Faye, but everyone. There's a method of transferring things to your mind. In a sense, you are leading your mind along. This is not fully accurate to just, but you can start with this metaphor and then work with it perhaps. It's like you're leading your mind around. You want your mind to notice the right things and not notice things that are counterproductive or distracting. That's another take on creative tension. I want my mind to notice that a particular target that I want, a goal, whatever that I want is a priority, or not having a particular state situation, not having mosquitoes or what was the other thing, these vermin on this peak is a priority. I want to notice that and not get distracted and notice that something else is important or incorrectly. Not have conditions that make it look like, when I say notice, I want to use a word that could contain error, see. I want my mind to see that the priority that I wanted to have is important. And it doesn't mean see doesn't imply accuracy, but your mind's going to act on what let's put it this way. Your mind is going to act on what it sees, right or wrong, correct or not. So I want my mind to see something productive rather than see something counterproductive. I don't want my mind to, part of my motivation for finding a great relationship and getting married and all that was that I didn't want to be at a coffee shop wanting my mind to see something I was working on. And instead it would see like a woman and start thinking about how to get to know that woman. Just to give a whimsical example. And it worked quite well. Part of the game, practically speaking in life, is you want to figure out what's accurate as best as possible, but you do that by chopping off the usual, chopping pieces off the gray, so to speak. So that'll narrow down where your mind can poke around. Another way to look at it, another way to represent it is you want your mind to see what's productive and not see things that are not productive. You might say, how does that relate to gray? Look, if you want to earn money and you decide, then at some point you stipulate that. And then some things are obviously counterproductive for earning money, right? Picking your navel, watching TV shows that are obviously unrelated to it, etc. Right? Chasing the opposite, chasing significant others in a way that is clearly productive for making money. I'm not saying what you should do overall with significant others, but saying that there could be clarity about, all right, I'm working on this task. All right, I have a client meeting tomorrow and I need to show them my progress. I need to do certain things, whatever it might be. Then it can be pretty obvious at that point that spending the entirety of that day chasing after a significant other is not what you want to choose to do. So then that's clear. And then you want your mind to see that and not with simple ways. You just don't point your physical eyes at a person. Go to a coffee shop where you're going to predictably see people that will distract you if that would distract you, right? Or then you can maybe work on context where it doesn't distract you. But if it does, then don't go there. Then you won't see that and it'll be easy. Okay. So how do you know? I realize I didn't answer the question, but you asked the question of epistemology and it fundamentally boils down to seeing what doesn't match, right? Maybe we've gotten to the point where spending a specific webinar next time with me talking about the method of seeing what's black and white, what's true and false. I think that might be the time for it to do it in the next webinar, so I can do that. whether a particular business model is right for you. Once again, the way you go about doing that is you start to look at extremes. So like you want to see what doesn't match. And in order to notice, you notice difference. So start with a big difference and then chisel from there, so to speak, roughly speaking. So say, all right, what clearly wouldn't be a good business model for me? Start there. And then start to work inward, however you say, I'm using metaphorical language, but like, all right, that isn't, but, and then you think around it different ways. You might think, what would be a trait that would be clearly a good, like something good I would want in a business? But then you might say, that's good, but is it necessary? And that's a different sort of question, right? I went on a rant last time about starting with the idea of value to another person. I thought of another illustration about that, by the way, which is if you're giving someone directions, or even if you're just trying to lead somebody somewhere, or you're trying to, let's say someone's in a counterproductive relationship. I'm not suggesting, I'm just saying, just as a quick illustration of the main concept. So they're in a clearly counterproductive relationship. You want to get the person out of that relationship, or they're having an addiction to a physical drug and you want to get them out. If you can't see where they're at, in other words, we talked about this with something related to this with the mind reading and alchemy. If you can't see where they're at in a way where it makes sense within at least their box, right, in a way you can kind of certain way respect or appreciate. If you can't appreciate what a business owner, a plumber had to do to make his business work fundamentally to the point where SEO could even help him in the first place, if you don't really appreciate that, I don't mean thank them for it. If there's and there could be maybe a continuum one, the more you appreciate it, but the more you can hone in on the layers, the factors, what it had to go through, but then what they have to do now, what they might have to give up now. The more, sorry, I have one thread, but not the other. The more I remember about one thing about what I'm saying, but not the separate thread. I'll continue here, see if I can get on it. So obviously the simple thing that I was saying was finishes itself, right? The more you can appreciate where someone else is, but what else was I saying? Where the business owner, with addiction or with a relationship, the more you can understand what they're getting out of it that's good. Same thing with yourself. If you want to give something up, we can apply this as also to getting something. But if you want to give something up in your life or you want to stop doing something, you have to figure out what it is that you're getting out of. So, and I need to figure out where I was fully going with this. Oh, business model right for you. And I was saying about value the other person. So it's just, this all relates to value the other person. These are all similar things. There's a way that we buy too much wave our hand or bypass or don't assign enough priority or value to getting a sense of where the other person's at. We think we know where they're at. But if you don't, like I mentioned in that mind reading thing in alchemy, if you don't like respect in a certain way, if you don't see the good in where they're at, there's obviously if you're trying to get them out of it, there's bad. But if you don't see the good in taking drugs or the good in what they're getting out of the relationship, or there might be no bad. If you don't, as it relates to the client thing, or if you're a parent, you just see what you want your child to do, but if you don't see the good in eating, sure, what they're getting out of it that they like, or playing, having screen time, or just watching stuff that you want to limit. If you don't really see the good in a way that you really feel the good, not just where you, again, wave your hand, oh yeah, I get it, right? But if you don't get it properly, if you don't really get where they're at, you're not going to be very effective at leading them to where you want to take them. Right? Of course, that's important with conversion, but it's important with a business model in the sense of your product. If you don't really respect the value the perceived value to another person, if you're too much in your head with how you like your product, you want to deliver your product, it's value to you. It's again, too much like a mother who sees what they want to do with their child, where they want their child to go, how they want their child to grow up and the habits they want the child to have, but they're not seeing where their child's at and what they're liking. You're not going to be effective at getting your child there. You might even see progress in terms of you act in ways that are behavioristic, where you make your child do certain things in various ways and you think you're doing it right. But ultimately, you're probably doing things that are very counterproductive overall for your child, where now they're dependent on the parent or the authority figure being there in order to be disciplined, right? And so to speak. And then they need authority like a drug, right? And they go from authority figure to authority figure, and that's the only way they know to live their life. Many people are like that. where it's like a drug with authority figures. They can't function without it because of their parents thought it was better early on. Because it looks like you're making, it's such a huge classic common example of where people think they're making progress. I don't personally know like any parent that doesn't at some point fall back on the I'm your parent, you have to obey me. I literally never fall back on that because it's arbitrary. Why? What about being their parent makes it so they have to do what I say? There has to be some other, if there's not, and the minute at the bottom, this is early on in the development, this is early on in their system, belief system, you put an arbitrary reason for that, and it's going to be pretty generalized about authority figures and people in general, reasons for doing things. That one thing is generalized. I see it when you go look for it in people's minds. At some level, it's generalized. There's people, you can find all sorts of exceptions. Oh, I don't just listen to authority and so forth. But ultimately, people generally do in a deep enough level. They might have a huge leeway and be very rebellious and very independent. And yet, at some level, they think that, yeah, you have to obey because it's their parent. You have to obey because it's this reason, the government figure. So this is another angle in terms of making money. There's another angle on you need to start with the other person's app. And you need to have two things to start. You need to know like what you can deliver. If you're giving driving directions, you need to know where the place is, right? You need to know you need to get a sense of what you can deliver. I agree. Like your product or service, but you need to have an absolute boundary, I think, of what other people are going to value. Traffic that you can get to, or people that you can reach somehow are going to see the value of. They're going to see progress the whole way through. They need to already be on the local peak that you're selling is another way to put it. Oh, this is beautiful. Because of local peak theory, we can see this, we can represent this in a way that you couldn't without local peak theory. Here's what you want to avoid in business. So there's the mountain range, right? You are aware of a high peak. People want to get higher. They want to walk higher. Okay. You make a product that's on a peak and it literally is higher than where they're at. Okay. Or it's what they want, but they have a valley to get there. Don't sell that. You're looking for something that's on the peak that they're already on. If you want to get them to another peak, do that on your own time. Do that. Don't mix that with making money. Why do I say that? Making money, of course you can mix it with making money if making money is optional, right? But if making money is necessary for you, then you don't mess with it. You don't take the money you need for retirement or for living right now and put it in the stock market, because it could crash, right? The stock market gives you the best return on investment of any other reasonable thing, as far as I'm aware. Like the index fund and the S&P 500 apparently turns like 11% or 12% over time for decades. Since it started, maybe. I admit that. But and some can dispute me on the fact. Maybe you can't lose much in an index fund. And if that's the case, fine. But if it's the case that you can lose it, so you don't risk, if you need money, you don't take a risk with it. You don't put a failure condition in to what you're doing. A failure condition is something that could take you out, that could make it impossible for you. And that's why if you want to get them on a different peak, then see, there's two different things that we can both call conversion, and people mix them up. And what you want to do for money is the type of conversion where you're showing someone, hey, look, see this peak you're on? See how if you take this step up, look, this product is a little higher on the peak. You can see it, right? And they're like, yeah, of course I can see it. That's what you want to sell them. That's the type of conversion you want to do for money. The type of conversion I'm doing with you and here, perhaps, is where I'm trying to get you off of a one peak and onto another. And what I want to do overall, that's a different type of conversion. It's two different things. Within OMG, there's a number of ways that I try to get people onto a different peak because the trouble is in order to make money, some people are stuck on a peak where they literally can't make money. They have certain ideas and certain heuristics or they lack certain, even separately from meta beliefs, just believing that it's normal to make a bunch of money. That's something that OMG gets people on a different peak with by making it normal to make a bunch of money. I do that for people invisibly and it just happens to them by meaning I and everyone else in OMG, of course. I'm never taking full credit or even most credit or whatever for credit about OMG, but you get what I mean. So one of the things that people might have to switch is the kind of what they think is a normal amount of money to make, right? That's a peak they need to switch from, but I don't try to convince, I impose that on people by, they get in a community where it's normal and they're getting around a bunch of coaches that where it's normal, right? Not a coach who's paid where to him it's not normal to make that much money, right? But that's the way it was before OMG out there. where the coach themselves then would be an employee. And so the norm they'd really be spending was with that mentality. So that's the challenging thing. That's why it's tough in one way, doing what I do, of selling a make money program, so to speak. And once I try to frame out of it, that's fundamentally what's going on in a sense. And it's easy to sell because people can see they perceive the value in that. But then the trouble is for them to be actually successful, you need sometimes it can be tough, but we accomplish it. But at least in terms of the initial transaction, right? For the most part, you want to make money, here you go. Get in our program. Right? There's an audience to whom they're willing to pay for that. I don't have to convince them. There's other people where they wouldn't be there. I have to take them on a different peak, right? Like OMG is on a higher peak in terms of making money than a lot of people in real life are on. But a ton of those people, they're on a different peak. They're an employee mentality, or they think everything like this is a scam, that sort of thing. Then they're not going to perceive value in this type of thing, period, no matter what. And so we don't try to sell to those people, right? Conversion and for making money, again, you don't want it to be about getting them on a different peak. It's a whole different thing. But again, you can accomplish it, but it's a process, and you don't want to do it when there's a time limit and you need to make money. You need to make it at least within some time frame. So again, I don't know, that's pretty cool. Look at it, both a couple of things I want to look at, the local peak theory and also making a business model. Sell people what's on a peak that they currently are on and therefore see. And if you don't want to do that, make money first and then do it a different way. And if you don't like that, then find a way to live without making money. What if you are wrong in dating or money about what you are sure you don't want? That's why and I know you asked this all at once, so it's not like you asked this response when I said, but that's why the question of epistemology matters. It's in one sense, a circular thing, but it's not circular. When people don't fully grasp the answer to the question of epistemology, they ask about what if you get it wrong? But the very nature of answering it is that you answer it. It has to be answered in a way that you're answering it correctly. And people are stuck in a circular trap, not seeing that, but you can get out of there. And there is an answer that you can also understand is correct. And then you won't be wrong about, say, some things. You won't like, there's some things you can identify as incorrect that are definitely incorrect. You learn to do that. You just stop saying gray is black or gray is white. That's when you're wrong in life. You just eyeball. What you can do is something can be gray and you say, let me try that. It's gray, but I'm going to eyeball. Like, looks more white than black to me. I'll say it's white and let's go for it. So what you don't do is stick your neck out, right? You don't get yourself in a deadfall because you cut that off. Anything that could totally take you out, whatever that means, totally kill you in some way that really matters. I don't mean physically kill you or not, but something where it's like a deadfall or however you want to represent, then that's black. You don't poke in that way. But so if you're not sure, then you don't overextend and then you poke to find a way to become sure. And maybe you're never sure about certain things. You're never going to be sure about the answer to the question, is this particular person the best person on the planet that I could possibly make? That's not the kind of question you're going to be sure to, but then that's the kind of thing you can know that you're never going to. I don't see how you can know that. Someone could show me how, but I mean, it's pretty clear that you can't know that. You'd have to pretty much know every detail somehow. Mike Long said, David spelled out, I don't call him Mike Long, I should read, but called him Michael. David spelled out basically what he's saying now in regards to what he wanted out of a relationship to me. So I spelled out to Mike in 2004, shortly a few months before he met his wife. And they had just such a wonderful relationship that I've observed plainly up close and afar since. Yeah, I appreciate that one. I really succeeded with that. Faith said, you date or try to determine. Okay, no. Whenever you are, and these are good questions and I'll address them here, but also I'll look to spend a webinar on epistemology on this exact question. At the point where you're weighing evidence, I'm not saying that's what you're saying, but I'm answering your question in the usual way. I'm shaving off black and white things. And then there might be some gray left over that I haven't cleared up yet. And then we can work on that. But you answer everything by shaving off black and white. And the more you get used to that, it takes getting used to in a sense because it's so opposite what people normally do. People want to look at gray and see whether it's black or white. And I'm not telling you that you can do that. What I'm telling you is if you look at gray and say, all right, that's gray, where's the black and where's the white? Then you can find black or white. But if you're looking at gray and trying to find out whether it's black or white, you might not succeed. You succeed, and if you do succeed, you do it by finding white and building from there, finding black and scraping off from there. That is how you find out that something that before was gray is black and white. But you won't necessarily clear up all the gray in the world by doing that. But whatever, you will make the most progress in the world. Good night, Kurt. So at the point where you're weighing evidence, like some people will say, I'm about the facts here. We're fact-based, right? We just report the facts, or we just weigh the facts, or I'm about science and I know things by cold hard facts, blah, blah, blah. So there's lots of angles on that. Or I let the evidence take me where the evidence takes me. That's anything like that is your brain. It's the scientific method itself is not discovered. That the scientific method is the correct method for operating within gray. A lot of stuff that's called science has not been arrived at to the scientific. As soon as you hear the word the scientific consensus, then of course you're not doing the scientific method. You're just voting, right? Which is not the scientific. Right? But the scientific method is correct method for operating when you have to use feedback to see what works and so forth. But the method doesn't tell you what's true. The method is just the right method for guessing best. You don't gain any knowledge of black or white through it. Or I could say that wrong. The knowledge you gain through the scientific method is not of the gray that you're looking at, but I have to give it a specific example, which is not coming to mind to illustrate more perfectly what I'm saying. When you gather data, if you know how to properly phrase, represent what you gathered, like if Greg gathers data about SEO, Greg can say that, assuming the normal general view of the world where I'm not just totally hallucinating, there's that. He doesn't say it every time, but you can be aware of that. So you stipulate that. And then you can say, there's a number of things you can be aware of in the background that it's silly to repeat over and over again. My memory is not going totally wacky and things like that. But it's perfectly reasonable to stipulate those, because what would be the opposite? Try to act as if your memory has no correlation to the past. That's ridiculous. You have to act on it a bit, right? You got to act like you don't know where the refrigerator is in your house or who your parents are. That'd be ridiculous, right? So you stipulate those things, perfectly reasonable to do so. You don't know that your memory is accurate, but you can know the big stuff, like keeps data, like in spreadsheets, on what anchor text he's used and where his rankings have been over the last 6 months for various sites. Then he knows that he can say, that's the data I've collected, right? Given if I stipulate that I didn't make clerical errors, right, and that there's not some other wacky thing going on, then I have that data. And it's reasonable to act as if that data is data. And then you use that to guess. And then there might be a guess that makes more sense than another guess. In the absence of any other information, you can even do this with, I'm not going to name any, but with gender minorities, whatever. If you have to guess who has a higher SAT score and you're only given the gender or ethnicity, or you want to have someone voted and you're only given their gender or ethnicity or whatever marital status, and you have no other information and you have to guess, then obviously you guess with the base rate. And so that guess is correct, not as but that if someone's a single unmarried woman, then you guess they voted for it. And then, and that's the correct guess if you had to guess based on only that data. Now you would try not to base too much on that guess because you only have 60% chance of being right or 70% chance or 55, whatever, depending on which election. So, but you certainly guess one rather than the other, do you see? So you can actually know that if the information that you have is taken in a vacuum, that a certain thing. What you can also know, though, is once you're in the evidence process, you're like, I was saying before, I let the evidence take me where it will. I follow the evidence here. I'm fact-based. Then we're not talking about splicing off gray and white. Like at the point where you're guessing unless you are, it depends on how you interpret what I said, but at the point where you're letting evidence determine a conclusion, then you do not know the conclusion. You might know that it's the right percentage guess based on the information you have at your disposal. You might not know that it's the better percentage guess, but you might know that it's the right guess based on the information you have at your disposal. You might know that it'd be better off not to guess at all, or you might know that you have to guess. Or you might stipulate that you have to, right? There's various ways things that can happen. But if it's evidence, then you don't know. No such thing as knowledge based on evidence. If we are talking about knowledge in the sense of black and white, where it's known with a correct way that can't be wrong. So that starts to give some more of the puzzle about epistemology. The peak theory is very helpful to see that about making money. Excellent. Love that. Yeah, about the conversion thing. Good. Maria said, I was recently able to, looks like we have to wind down here soon. I was recently able to see how much foundational progress I had made in my adult life. Extremely exciting. I was temporarily asleep from my progress. Oh, it doesn't look like others' years progress, and I accepted that. Oh, it doesn't look like the progress that other OMGers have made. Got it. So Maria sees progress in her OMG endeavors, making money generally with our monetization method, free traffic. And her progress doesn't look on the surface the same as some other people's progress. You've accepted that. You celebrate everyone's success, which is excellent. Great to celebrate other people's success. It helps you a lot to do that. Because then you psychologically block yourself out of all the helpful things about other people's success. If you feel not like jealous or whatever, right? You can get the norm of their success, which help drag you with your default. You might say, wait, David, I thought we're not supposed to use standards and norms. No, I didn't say we're not supposed to use them. We're not supposed to be locked into them. Your mind acts like it acts. Again, in the gray area, your mind operates as if it's gray area. What you do is you work with it. You don't deny it. So of course your mind's going to look around at standards and norms and try to keep up with them and so forth. Again, you want to work with that. And whenever it's clearly wrong, you want to cut that. Whenever there's something clearly right, you want to definitely have it. But when it's gray, that's how it's going to act. We all know that social proof or celebrity endorsement or whatever is just mainly a marketing technique. But if it's the only thing you have, then it's okay to go with it. If I have no idea whatsoever which chiropractor to go to, and if a bunch of my friends say, yeah, this guy's good, then it's perfectly, and I have no other, again, one could say maybe you should go research more, but eyeball, it's all gray. How much should I research? It's reading, do it. In the gray area, you act as if it's gray. And if it's particularly important, then you shave off more of the gray area. Continuing, Maria wrote, when I embraced that, I felt like I was shot out of a cannon and start building at a different level, if that makes sense. Love it. Absolutely. If you measure by some version of the understanding line, then exactly right. And I think my interpretation of what you're saying is that I think you're really on a good track. And I wouldn't say that if I didn't think that's true. Bryce said the best takeaway for tomorrow, sell for something that is higher but on the same peak. Absolutely. In terms of pure tactics that are applicable for you right now, then yeah, more angles on this perceived value thing for other people. And the local people one is an excellent one of that. I agree. I'm glad that came about. How did I get there? How do I do these webinars? What do I do? I spend a lot of time during the week, and particularly a lot of time today, shaving off, deciding I do want to talk about this. I figuring things out. I go through ideas. I think through threads. I see what might be wrong about something or where I might head wrong and find more and more. But I have no idea. I don't actually come up with an exact script or even exact slides on what's best, right? So I shave off gray, then I embrace the gray. And then I could pretend that I wasn't, and it would look like normal, more normal. And I would if I had to, right? When it was for money, made it look more normal. This is not for money. Yeah, it's behind a paywall right now. It's great to talk to a specific audience and stuff. So I like that I'm doing it for active OMGers with that director's cut and HP 2017. Who can have this. But anyway, I'm not really specifically doing this for money. So I can do a little of each. And I can operate how I know. Ultimately, we get to where we're going best. And when you're trying to make gray feel black and white to yourself and to others, like either I know it's gray and I'm trying to pretend like it's black and white to you guys, or within terms of slides, okay, today we have these slides, this structure, and we're going to do this. So this is the first step for learning law of implication. Is this is step one? This is step two. I don't know what those steps are. So I would have to just pretend, and then that would be a cognitive dissonance in my own head while I'm talking. Is that helpful? No. Again, if I were able to buy my own BS, then I might be able to make a presentation that on one level was more compelling, but it wouldn't be correct. I can't think the way that I think and not see that not be. So you can't get someone who understands what I understand that can then blow smoke up their own ass in that way, right? And so we're stuck in that way and buy their own BS or whatever. So if I know it's great, I'd rather present it in a way where we all get that. Then I don't know exactly what I'm about to say. However, I do plenty of preparation and I have lots of stuff prepared, white and black, so to speak. I narrow it down greatly, but then I don't pretend after that with slides that are pretend. And so totally valid if you need to for other reasons, right? But you guys are also here because you want to be here. You have a sense of who I am at this point. And so if it's just more introductory to people, maybe I would do it a little bit differently. But I did that with alchemy within reason. I could potentially fake it better. But again, I'll do that when I have to, but I'll learn I want to learn what happens this way. So I don't happen to be in a place where what I want to poke is by faking it better. Again, and I have a theory that the way I can get rid of the gray, I'd rather get rid of the gray axis rather than fake it. Faking it, it's not necessarily totally wrong, but I think a more productive way will be, or at least if it is wrong, I don't see clearly right now how it is. But what I do see is that I figure I'll do it this way, like kind of like a talk radio thing where I prepare stuff, but then I just talk. And then order can arise from the chaos. And that might lead to me having a good sense of an organization that's more overt in the future. But that's what I'm working on. That's what I'm trying this time. So it's a real plan. Megan Lee says, wow, what an answer about conversion. Sell people something on the peak they are already on that they can see to make money. I.e., don't sell something they perceive as pie in the sky, even if we have the pie or can get them to it. That's right. Exactly right. Don't make them go through a valley and tell them to trust you. People have a real hard time trusting even that believe I'm awesome, right? Not easy. Getting people from their peak, one peak to another is a whole thing. Totally necessary and worth doing. But why, when something's important, I don't couple it with something that's going to hobble me, right? So that's why in my own life, and I suggest for you guys, you separate things. Same reason why, when you try to accomplish two things at once, it might be great if you can achieve them both, like making money, taking someone to a higher peak. But the problem is you also just might not accomplish either one. And it's timely with money, do that. If you have to, if you don't have to, don't worry about it. And if you happen to hit both at the same time, if you happen to marry a millionaire who's also perfect in every other way, then great. No problem. That's super. That's an extra thing you'd be grateful for, right? When you can see results, gratitude, we talked about this last time, right? Nifty. But that doesn't mean that now that's the suggestion you give to everyone else. I always wondered why you went to extremes in your examples, David. Yeah, it's as simple as it's easier to see. And I start there. Why would I start with some? It's only in my head, right? So I start with an extreme. I do a quick check. And some things in the extreme are still good. Understanding is a big example of that, but there's plenty of other examples. What if your wife and yourself don't argue ever? Then that's fine. If you don't argue because you're holding stuff back that you should discuss, that's not fine. But merely not arguing isn't bad. So there you go. Anyway, you discovered. And we've had difficult discussions in our marriage at times. And we've had talks where it might be framed as arguing if one was inclined to frame it. But we do quite well. Julie said, answer everything by shading off black and white. Yep, beautiful. I know. But I can appreciate it because what? I'm not faking it. I didn't see that until it came out. A lot of things that I say, when I look back at a webinar and say that was pretty cool, I'm in the same position as you are. I didn't know what it was going to be ahead of time, right? Again, I shaved off black and white. I had a gray, and then I didn't know what was going to happen inside of there. And sometimes I'm happier with it. Sometimes I'm less happy. Once I said, hey, I want to make sure I don't eat carbs much before a webinar because I don't do as good a job in the gray area when my brain isn't working. Maybe I had a few today, and that's why maybe I lost my train of thought more than I would if I didn't. Who knows? Although it all worked out. I don't mean that it ruined the webinar. But maybe I wouldn't even have that if my brain chemistry was a little bit better. Maria said, asking myself, and I'm in the lightning round here, but asking myself, how am I to understand the concept of justification? What makes justified beliefs justified? Is justification internal or external? And we'll specifically take a look at the question of epistemology next time. The whole justified true belief thing is a little bit off that they talked about it in the academic epistemology. Faith says, the question I had from the first question of the game webinar is along a similar line. How do you know you are in the right to keep persevering? Yeah, good question. I constantly had that in mind. So I think if you even look at this webinar, in light of that question, I further helped answer how to do that. But that really gets to something pretty fundamental that it isn't a matter of I can give you a one sentence answer. But that's what this is about, is like answering that, is addressing that. Because obviously I led you to realize that's a critical question, right? Once you see the local peak or peak metaphor or illustration isn't a better word, you realize that one of the main questions in life is, and so let me say this, is once you grasp the local peak illustration and grasp that it parallels how real life is in a good way, in a useful way. Of course, with any metaphor, you can go off. You can take a wrong turn outside of how it applies to real life, right? You say life is like a box of chocolate. then there's all kinds of ways that life is not like a box of chocolates, right? The local pig metaphor is quite apt, but there's ways you could distort it and go and take turns and do that it doesn't apply to life. But anyhow, once you see that, then you realize that one way or the other, you need to figure out a way to understand progress that isn't just seeing whether you're climbing higher, right? So you need to have a way of seeing or noticing or something analogous to see that isn't the same as what you take for granted as seeing in terms of the progress. And then that has to come, that's primary before you can make progress. You need to figure out how you can understand about progress. And maybe there's going to be plenty of aspects about making progress that are going to remain gray. But maybe you can see black and white about making progress. And the more you see black and white about making progress, definitely do this, definitely don't do that, right? You narrow it down. So now you know the progress is within this smaller gray area and what to do inside of a gray area that's optimal. And maybe that's how you make progress. And that's it, right? So that's yet another way to point it. Right? What do you do in the local peak situation? You need a way to identify if you're not on the best peak and then what to do about it, right? After that. And part of it involves fumbling around, right? And think about it. There's some things that can reveal themselves perhaps pretty easily and quickly. And I even referred to them maybe in passing before. You need to be able to, at some point on a peak, maybe it's not until you get to the top, maybe it's before that, you can tell for sure that you're not on the right peak. And then that's great. And then that's all you need to know. And then you find a different peak and start climbing until you realize whether you're on the right, that you're on the wrong peak. So it could be that if you can just identify when you're on the wrong peak, and then other than that, you're fumbling around in a way that maybe you find some optimal ways to fumble around, but you're still fumbling around. But within fumbling around, there's certain things you do when you're fumbling around, some things you don't, right? And that's how you're going to approach the whole issue. That's how life is. Of course, I fumble around, right? This webinar is in one sense me fumbling around within what I knew by my preparation ahead of time, both for decades and then this week, right? Not only do I prepare this week, but obviously I wouldn't have started this series if I didn't have a whole bunch that I colored in that I knew I wanted to get. But despite everything that I've figured out, everything I know, there's a way that even I don't even know what slides to make ahead of time. I even made slides. I just never referred to them in this webinar. I made them in case, but it was better. It worked out better. Just the slides are nice though. They also keep me. Again, it's something I've discovered. That's probably the last thing I said. It's reasonable for me to guess that if I don't have slides, I will feel more of a sense of panic early in the webinar than if I do have slides. Just the existence of them, could it be the case that I wouldn't have no slide and still don't panic? Yes. But it's reasonable for me to suppose, to act on the idea that I'm safer by having slides and just in not feeling a little bit of a sense of panic. Not like a horrific sense of panic. I'm not like ready to like scream, jump out of my seat or cry. But there's still a sense that it interferes with my presentation, not presentation, but the flow. If I have slides, I know I have something to fall back on. I know that it's a reasonable guess. I might say, you might say, well, how do I even know that? I can get it. But it's all reasonable. It's a good guess that I have something to start with, right? I have a good sense of at least something to get myself started. And then I have some slides to fall back on. So good. Julie says, I find it's often about me putting just enough in place. I don't feel a sense of panic. Then I can just get on with things. Great. Yeah, exactly. You're very welcome, Brian. Okay, we'll wrap things up here. This was fun. This was great. We had a great discussion, right? Really were able to spend the whole time talking to each other based on what we started with and the other questions, which was great. And yet I had a couple of overall things I wanted to touch on and I did. So it was all kind of synergistic. Mike is awesomeness. I like that. I don't know what that ties into, but I don't disagree. Mike is great. All right. You're very welcome, guys. Take care all. Have a wonderful night. And again, thanks. Had to follow suit. No carbs before session. Just to listen. Pretty funny. Oh, another great wedding. Another great Debbie. That's great. You're welcome. Welcome, Peter. Welcome, Faith and Bryce. Excellent, guys. And thanks for your great questions, too. And responses and questions. That not just questions, but the thought you put into things in between. The questions come from somewhere. Oh, thank you, Shema. I appreciate that. I'm David, by the way. Mike is I'm Mike's sidekick. You could say. Unless you want to call him my sidekick. All a joke, of course. All righty. Mike also is awesome, however. You are welcome. Well, okay, guys. Wonderful.